Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It is January 17th, 2022, and we are here back for part two of our epic interview with Dr. Randy Bell. Hey, Randy Bell. Randy, my friend, thank you.
My friend John DeLynn.
How was lunch?
It was terrific, and thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you. For those of you who did not join us for part one, or who are just jumping in now based on the thumbnail or the title, which is From Mormon to Christian, we are in part two of our interview with Randy Bell. We spent 3 hours with him in the previous episode where we talked about him kind of being born into the Mormon Church in Orange County, California, being raised as one of 7 children, the second youngest of 7, doing the Mormon Orange County thing, growing up knowing the Leo Fender and the Fender family, enjoying his Mormon experience as a youth, doing the Mormon seminary thing in high school, graduating high school, serving the Mormon mission in the UK, in specifically the home of Led Zeppelin, which is where?
Birmingham, England.
Birmingham, England.
Yeah.
And eventually going to BYU and settling back in California, marrying at age 30, 31.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
In the Mormon temple, raising 4 kids Mormon. We talked briefly about his first marriage ending. He did remarry. And then we ended by Randy talking about his Mormon faith crisis and kind of how he lost his Mormon faith. That's how we ended. What we also were able to intermix into his story was his fascinating career. And Randy, I'm not going to do that justice. So for those who didn't catch part one, why don't you give us a quick recap of just briefly what your profession is and the types of cases you've been involved with so that people can know that your part one is fascinating and worth checking out.
Well, absolutely. Check it out. My career is in the field of real estate damage economics, and I study disasters. And so some of the cases I've worked on hundreds, but the World Trade Center, Hurricane Katrina.
The World Trade Center bombings, right?
Yeah. The Sandy Hook school shooting, the Pulse nightclub shooting, O.J. Simpson, John Benet Ramsey, Hurricane Katrina, the Bikini Atoll nuclear weapons tests. I've done cases, all over the world.
Yeah. And so you don't want to miss part one. And part two is particularly important to me and to many of my listeners because on Mormon Stories Podcast, I would say half of the people we've interviewed, if not more, there's something about Mormonism that for many who lose their faith in it and or leave it, they somehow migrate oftentimes to agnosticism or atheism. Mm-hmm. And I think both, Randy, you'd be the first to validate any path. I would as well. I personally don't identify as atheist or agnostic. That's not important to me to have that sort of identity or to make that sort of put that stake in the ground. Mm-hmm. For others, it's important. We have Carah Burrell, who'll be joining us briefly. For her, it's really important to put that stake in the ground. But one of the things we really like to do on Mormon Stories Podcast is provide healthy role models for everyone, regardless of where they are on the faith spectrum. And for some, just kind of migrating into a secular life is going to be what they choose. It's going to be what works for them or what works for them for a certain period of time. For others, it's going to be really important, even if you leave the Mormon Church, to hang on to God or hang on to Jesus or to find some sort of Christian church or other type of church that might work for you. Mm. We support that on Mormon Stories Podcast. We validate it. We've tried in the past, whether it's Paul Cardall, Sean McCraney, Sandra Tanner, there hopefully have been a lot of Mormon Stories Podcast interviews we've done with people that become Christians. We did a whole series on the South Mountain Church that I think was useful to a lot of people. And so we validate the Christian path, and we want to always showcase people who make that journey. So Randy, you're very much in that line. We covered your faith crisis in part one, and what we've billed this as for part two is From Mormon to Christian. And just briefly, I want to give a quick disclaimer about that. I started the last episode with this same disclaimer. I, of all people, am aware that Mormons take umbrage at and or are offended by any attempt to characterize them as non-Christian. That is not my intent in naming this episode. When you write thumbnails and YouTube descriptions or titles, you got to keep it to like 6 to 8 words.
Right.
And so it was just the quickest way for me to describe your journey. But in no way are we saying that Mormons aren't Christians. I was raised in the LDS Church. I felt that I was a Christian then. I was raised in Katy, Texas, with Southern Baptists who would always accuse us of not being Christian, and I hated that then. I don't think it's accurate now, and so that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is you did lose your faith in the Mormon Church, but you've settled in a place where you believe in some type of supreme being, and you self-identify as a Christian, and you have a certain set of beliefs in Jesus Christ. And we're going to be talking today about how you made that journey or that transition from ex-Mormon to someone who follows Christ and believes in Christ. Anything you want to add to that disclaimer or to that introduction before we jump in?
Well, I think you did a really nice job with that disclaimer. I certainly support those who remain Mormon or are Mormon. Certainly that includes a lot of my family and friends. So I echo what you said, that I have absolutely no malice. And whether people land there or stay there, or atheism or agnostic or Hindu or Buddhist, my path is Christian. I follow what Jesus said, don't judge, and love everyone. And that's just kind of the way I roll, or at least I try to. So thanks for the disclaimer. I agree with everything you said.
Okay. Excellent. And we're very, very lucky to have back with us in studio the Carah Burrell. Hey, Carah.
You're lucky. I'm lucky. It's going to be a great chat. I can't wait.
How you like Randy? How you like this Randy
I love
guy?
this guy.
Yeah?
I can't wait to read one of your books. I don't know which one to even start with. I think you're a fascinating man all around. Can't wait to get into this section of your beliefs. So,
Well, thanks. And I enjoyed our conversation over lunch over different beliefs. I love the discussions. So
yeah.
Rock and roll.
Yeah. Rock and roll. If there's one way to summarize so far, rock and or roll.
Rock and roll.
Yeah.
All right. So Randy, the way that we left off was just I don't know I think you even said catastrophe is an okay way to describe a Mormon faith crisis. I'm guessing that it felt catastrophic. Mm-hmm. It leaves you without a sense of spirituality, without a sense of community, without a sense of morality sometimes, without a sense of meaning and purpose, without resolutions about the afterlife. It can be really destabilizing and traumatic and distressing. And I know that one of the things I loved most about your part one, you talked about how with all your dealings professionally and in the courtroom, you do a lot of work in as a testifying in court. Mm-hmm. You've always valued epistemology. You've always valued critical thinking. Mm. And I got a sense that you felt like, man, how did I make it to 60 kind of bamboozled in a sense? So I'm guessing that as you wound up your Mormonism, you were not keen to be fooled again. Is that true?
Well, it's very true. What I did immediately, or right, in the midst of this whole shambles of my old belief system, was I turned back to my old school books of critical thinking, and I revisited and re-examined, the fundamentals of critical thinking and epistemology, because whatever I built back, and I genuinely didn't know what that was going to look like, I wanted it to have a defendable position. Even though these are big questions and ultimately we can't know, I have beliefs, but I no longer say I know. But whatever I believed, I wanted to have defensible reasons for it.
Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into your story. So, as you are having your world come undone and everything's falling apart religiously, let's take us through that point. Even if you have to draw back into some influences that may have informed your journey into Christianity, let's just jump in. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think the thing that I did was I started with Aristotle, and Aristotle taught egos, logos, and pathos. Egos is ethical. I want to, just stick with information that, right or wrong, people are telling the truth and not concealing anything. So ethos, logos, is it logical? Does this just make logical sense? And then pathos, meaning, does it resonate? Does the story ring true? I think emotion is still an element, an important element, but it needs to be balanced with egos and logos. And then the fourth thing is I added duos, which is I want to look at both sides of the story. I had not been looking at both sides of the story prior to that. And whatever position I wanted, if I was taking a believing point of view, I wanted to talk to atheists and agnostics. If I was taking an atheist or agnostic point of view, I wanted to listen to believers. I wanted to cover all my bases and listen to both sides of the story. And that was my fundamental, foundational game plan.
So having you lay it out with like 4 pillars, like I'm guessing almost none of my listeners were that rigorous and intentional at the beginning of the unraveling of everything. Are you saying like you literally sat down and came up with those 4 things and said, I'm gonna figure out what to believe now, and I'm gonna base it on those 4 pillars? Are you saying?
Well, I didn't quite do it that way,
Okay.
but yeah, I did sit down and I did, my head's spinning at this point, and I'm saying I got to get, stop from spinning and land somewhere. And I, frankly, through my doctoral program, I had the benefit of some really outstanding doctoral advisors and dissertation committee. They taught this stuff to me. I already knew it on a professional level. I just needed to basically dust off the textbooks and bring it back to my personal belief system.
Okay. So, let me just say that for, let's say, at least half of the people that we've interviewed and that I interact with, what often happens is they lose their faith in the Mormon Church. Mm-hmm. They lose their faith in Joseph Smith and in the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. But they really don't want to get rid of a belief in God mm-hmm. or in Jesus. Mm-hmm. So there's this period, and Carah, I think this might have been your experience a little bit. It's like, well, you can't lose faith in Jesus or God, right? And that's almost, sometimes parents, that's almost immediately their reaction is like, well, I hope you still believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? Right. But for some reason, for a lot of people who go through this, there's something about Mormonism. It's so totalistic. Mm-hmm. It's so, it basically devalues every other religious tradition and basically says they're all abominations. Right. They're all false. They're all corrupt. It just, and there's something about the uniqueness of the Mormon experience where for so many, it's just like, I'm done with all and what often happens is once you've learned how to deconstruct one scriptural text, meaning mm-hmm. the Book of Mormon, it doesn't take long to go, well, that Bible, and then they start applying those same, that same rigor, that same set of critiques to the Bible, mm-hmm. and then to God, and then what happens for so many is just it all unravels. Right. Was that how it started for you, or did you not even have that experience? Well, I had all of that. And again, I describe it as a lot of pots on the stove, I'm maneuvering around, but I was willing to accept that there is no God. And as I say here right now, I don't know that there's a God. I believe there's a God. I believe 51% or more of the evidence suggests that there's a God, but I don't know anything. So let's get real, about, this absolute, I know this, I know that. I don't know anything. Other than I don't know everything. and then I had lunch once with Penn and Teller, and I'm happy to go into comedians, right? Yeah, the comedians, the magicians down in Las Vegas. And Penn is a very ardent atheist. And I was there to talk about Houdini, my Houdini collection, not anything religious, but Penn was somewhat he was evangelizing me into atheism. At the time, I was a true believing Mormon. And we had a fascinating lunch. And he introduced me to The Blind Watchmaker by, I'm having a senior moment, not Christopher Hitchens. Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins. And
I became very fascinated with atheism because prior to meeting Penn and Teller, I kind of just assumed everyone believed in God. I don't know. I just hadn't given a lot of thought. And so I was willing to question that. I was willing to go agnostic. I was willing to go kind of where the evidence led me, the best I could, knowing that I, as you described it, I have a bias. Everybody has a bias. If you don't have a bias, then
you're lying,
yeah,
or unaware,
profoundly unaware.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a bias because I always liked Jesus ever since I was a little kid,
right?
And I recognize that. So I had to kind of acknowledge my bias. Acknowledge the critical thinking of egos, logos, pathos, and duos. Relook at all my epistemology research from my doctoral degree, and start with. My game plan was to look at atheism, science, agnosticism, deism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Jewish, and Christian. It was a big game plan. And I really went to work to study them all with as open mind as I possibly could.
So as best as you can, take us chronologically how you remember the journey happening. Unfolding.
Well, yeah. I first went to
Did you continue attending the Mormon Church after you no longer believed in the Mormon Church?
No, I was out. I didn't want to draw the process out. I was out. Period.
You just stopped. You lost your faith, read those essays, and you were just stopped attending.
Saw, on that day, that one single day, and I'm done. I'm out.
See, that's rare. A lot of people keep attending. Carah, I'm trying to remember what you did, but a lot of people keep attending even after they stop believing for whatever reason.
I was tempted to for community reasons, but I just didn't. It's kind of like, do you rip off the Band-Aid slow or fast? And it's like, I just can't accept this. These are not my values. I like upfront. I like full disclosure. I don't like undue influence. I know what that means from a legal point of view, and I just decided to rip the Band-Aid off fast.
Okay,
and get with it.
Yeah. Similar, I was sick to my stomach when I read the similar, gospel topics essays and the things that I had never known before about this prophet that I had said that I knew he was a prophet my entire life. I was sick to my stomach, and I couldn't imagine myself walking into a church building ever again after that day.
Yeah, I get it, because I think we're landed on the same place in that department for sure.
Yeah, no, physically and mentally out attending for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Just clean break.
Yeah, and one thing is that I talked to my brother, who's also Christian. He's a very bright guy, and he he's a recovered alcoholic. So he's really been through the meat grinder of life with some areas that he got, some mistakes he's made, but he's been sober for years and years and has really built a phenomenal life. So I had a lot of conversations with him. Like I say, to resolve a trauma, you got to find a new tribe that you can talk openly about things. So I talked to my brother, who's he had phenomenal insights. Then I also reflected on Judaism, and I had a friend. She just passed away at the age of 100, but she survived the Holocaust. Her name's Erica. She lived in downtown LA, and so whenever I was downtown with meetings or something, I would go and visit her prior to COVID. And Erica was so bright and so cheerful. And whenever I went to the nursing home, she'd be the one person out in the sunshine, and she took up at the age of 80 oil painting. And beautiful oil paintings. And I've been fortunate to collect several of her paintings. But I would sit and talk to her for hours about her faith and the Holocaust and what she went through. And what I found so baffling and so fascinating is that she somehow made peace. She had to make peace with Hitler, of all people. And she would talk about the Nazi soldiers in very compassionate terms, in terms of they had fear in their eyes and they had grief in their eyes. They were being traumatized. I'm not saying what they did was right. I'm not trying to build a sympathetic case for Nazi soldiers or for Hitler, but she found a way to make peace with them. And her Jewish faith allowed her to do that. And
you sense that she still believed in God and still believed in the tenets of her Jewish faith?
I sensed that she did, but she wasn't verbose about them. She was very quiet about them. I would ask her, and I would respect boundaries and this and that, but her faith was very quiet, but it was there. And it was such that, and I thought, whatever she's got, because I got to make peace with, Joseph Smith, and I got to make peace with the apostles and prophets that didn't come out and talk about this stuff decades or forever ago as they should have. So I got a lot of a sense of insights from Erica and her journey. I thought if she can survive the Holocaust and losing a lot of her family, I think most of it, I can do this. That gave me
if her
strength.
faith can survive that?
Yeah, if her faith can survive it, and her disposition, her sunniness, her cheerfulness, and it wasn't a phony masking the pain kind of thing. She was real. She was authentic. And she found various avenues to channel her thinking into positive ways. And that was really my interest. I wasn't interested in, bashing Mormonism or any other ism. That just wasn't, and is still not my agenda. I was looking for people that had healed and learning from them. So I gained something from Judaism and my long talks with Erica.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you actually investigate Judaism as a faith to join?
I have another buddy who's Jewish, and we go to lunch all the time. And I don't get, and also one of my dissertation or one of my college professors, she converted from Catholic to Judaism, and I talked to her. I looked into it. I will just say I looked into it, and I found that it had some really beautiful tenets and beliefs. I have them in my notes. I don't have them memorized, but so yeah, I considered it. I don't know that I really went down that road far in terms of should I convert to Judaism, but I had talked to people that had, and I got insights from their journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What's next?
Well, then I was in Egypt and Israel, and I wandered into I was with a Arab-Israeli guy who is a very funny guy. We had a lot of fun, but he was very brash, and he would go into areas that were very militarized and not have any fear. And I'm looking at all these machine guns and watchtowers and stuff, and I was petrified. And but he took it too far. We were going. I wanted to see the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, which is in Hebron, and we went there. And he says we can either go this path that all the tourists go on, or we can take the real path. I said, well, let's take an adventure. And somebody said the area is hot, which I thought means take off my jacket. I didn't know what hot meant. Hot meant it's a combat zone. So we're going down there, and we're walking along this road that was like out of a movie. And this guy came out and started screaming at us and telling us he was going to shoot us. So my buddy, my guide, he says, just back up slowly. And I just started walking backwards. And I won't get into that whole conflict, but that was pretty freaky. So we went up and around. We were walking by a elementary school that had been just blown up. And all of a sudden, the air raid sirens went off. My buddy hit the deck and went against a wall. I was scared to death. I went against a wall. And all of a sudden, there was machine gun fire on the other side of the wall. A bomb went off. I was horrified. I thought I've taken it too far. I love adventure. I'm curious, but this is nuts. And I'm sitting there crouched against this wall, and these three Muslim guys come out of their house, crouched down towards me, and I thought, I don't know what's going to happen here. And they came up to me, and this guy looks me in the face, and he goes, I hate your government, but I love you. And I said, I love you too, man. I was so relieved. He goes, we put up with this shit every day. Can you believe this? He says, stay here, stay low, and if it gets worse, we will hide you in our house. And I thought, that's awesome. And they literally protected me with their bodies.
And you got a sense they were Muslim?
Oh, they were Muslim. They told me they were Muslim.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I don't know what their parents put in their cornflakes, but I want some of that. Or, I'm their enemy as an American, and they're out protecting me. I don't know that I thought, boy, maybe I should become a Muslim, but I sure gained a respect for that faith. Because, there are terrorists, and there's this and there's that, and there's all kinds of labels. I say I'm Christian, and people, get all kinds of ideas. But underneath that,
over there, they see Christians as terrorists, right?
They do.
And Jews,
they
right?
do. Whole different perspective. Yeah. Whole different perspective. Yeah. And I mean, there were lots of stories with, Islamic people and Muslims, but that's just one to illustrate that I gained. I kind of put off my stereotypes and my prejudice, Jesus's words of "I was a stranger and you welcomed me" took a whole new meaning when that was done to me. That I need to do that to others. So that was a big moment in my faith journey, and just kind of putting off the stereotypes and just being cool and letting people. Let them know who you are rather than making prejudgments, which I was very prone to doing prior to that. Another one was I went to India, and I had a guide there, and actually he was Hindu, and he took me around temples. There's this one temple that I don't know how to explain it, and I know people would say, oh, that's this elevation emotion. I get that. But this place was just deeply spiritual. And then we went to Buddhist temples, and then he pointed at another temple. He says, well, this is that's kind of a subset of Buddhism. They're very wealthy there. And I just wasn't particularly interested in that. We went to the Ganges River, and I was just trying to immerse myself in that. And we talked about meditation. And ironically, of all places, I learned about meditation in San Quentin prison. I was sitting on a plane. A buddy came up to me. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. He looks at me, he goes, "Hey, are you Randall Bell?" And I look up, and "Oh, are you?" And and it was an old buddy from 15 years ago. He volunteers at San Quentin prison, and I was fascinated. And then on the flight, he says, "Well, you want to go to prison? I'll get you in." And I said, and the thought that went through my mind, it was, Jesus always said, visit those in prison. I've never done that. I've totally neglected that. And as I explore Christianity, I need to, see what that's all about. So I went into prison, and it was the most surreal spiritual experience I've ever had. Take all the sacrament meetings and Paul H. Dunn firesides and all the seminary and all the BYU devotionals, put them all together in a jar of spirituality. What I experienced in prison, where these inmates are oftentimes in for the rest of their lives, and watching their process and their struggles to lead a good, decent life, even in prison, was just surreal. And the first time I meditated, I was in a circle of men and other volunteers in a circle, and I was literally holding hands with 2 convicted murderers. But I'm happy to drill down into that if you like, but I can just tell you that it was profoundly spiritual, profoundly insightful. And by the way, this is a secular program. This is not a religious outreach program. It's all this is all secular. But that was, I don't know, I walked away from that experience, and I kept going back and back and back. But I kept going back because it was so spiritually satisfying, like I had never experienced before. So hopefully you're kind of getting the idea that I'm open to any experience as long as I think it's got a shot at learning something new.
And I'm not getting the sense that when you're studying Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or talking to your Muslim friends or your Jewish friends that you're really investigating joining a church. It sounds like you're learning about how people believe, why they believe, and you're learning about different modes of belief. And it sounds like in your journey, it's making you, it's making you more aware of and knowledgeable about world religions, which Mormonism doesn't really encourage. And it's helping augment and build your respect for various religious traditions. And that I can relate to that too. That's all, one of the gifts of a Mormon faith crisis or any faith crisis is seeing that there's a big, beautiful world out there.
Yeah.
And that there's truth and beauty everywhere.
Yeah.
That Mormons or Christians don't have a monopoly on truth or wisdom or goodness or morality. And you can even find that everywhere. So it sounds like you were having that experience, which I relate to, but it also doesn't sound like you were church shopping per se, at least in what you've described so far. Is that true?
I think that's true. The only thing I would add is that I was approaching all of these, whether we're talking about inmates or a Holocaust survivor or a Hindu man, or any of these folks. I was looking to them as having something I needed to learn from them. I wasn't there to proselytize them. I wasn't there because I hadn't landed on Christianity. And I wasn't sure, and I was open that if they said something really provocative, maybe I should investigate further, which I did in the prison thing. Secular program, but I went back and spent weeks up there and got certified. Now I can go into prisons and facilitate these group meetings. So I was open to whatever there was, but I always had the belief that these folks all had something to teach me. I didn't have anything to teach them. I didn't know which way was up, but I had something to learn from them.
Isn't that beautiful to discover that for me, I talk about the burdens of Mormonism. One of the burdens for Mormonism for me was feeling like we were the one true church and we had all the goodness and all the truth and that everybody else was inferior. I actually experienced that as a burden as a Mormon, because that wasn't how I saw the world, but that's how I felt like my church taught me to see the world and humankind. So when I lost my Mormon faith, all of a sudden I felt like I joined the human race and was able to love and respect everyone no matter what. And it was very, very uplifting for me.
I couldn't agree more. It was. I think of it as I went from black and white to full color, because these folks, these people that I used to be self-righteous and judgmental of, I'm not saying all Mormons are, but I can speak for myself. I was that way. And I don't think I learned that, on my own. But that all being said, I went into full color mode where I realized that these people had, just great wisdom, great stories, great humor, great everything. And I had been missing out on seeing that, before all this.
Okay.
For sure.
So you said you lost your faith around 2016, 2017 in Mormonism, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first stepped foot in a non-Mormon church as an observer / investigator? And was there any flirtation with atheism or agnosticism before or after that moment you first stepped foot in a church? And what was the impetus to you making that first step into a church?
Well, I remember going on Amazon and ordering Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. I thought his title was very arrogant. I mean, in other words, all of us who believe in God are delusional, But I was kind of like pressing the like a John DeLynn Facebook post for the first time. You feel a little fear and trepidation. I'm going to like John DeLynn's post, but I muscled through that, and then I pushed the buy button for Richard Dawkins, and I bought all the atheist books I could think of. And I called atheist friends. I said, "What books do you recommend I read?" And I remember being fearful, thinking, "Oh man, I'm really dabbling with the devil here," kind of thing.
Name the main authors just so people know.
There's Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett. And then the new one I've just added
Michael
to the list.
Shermer.
Yeah, there's others, but those were the main four.
Okay.
And someone close to me particularly recommended Dawkins. And I thought, you know what, maybe there's something really compelling here. So I read the Dawkins book once, and then chapter 4 really popped out at me, because that's where the rubber meets the road, at least as far as I can tell. Chapter 4 is titled "Why There Almost Is Certainly No God." It's a very long title, but that's the title as I recall. and I read it probably 10 times to get it. And
Do you remember even a tiny bit enough to just describe the main argument that?
Sure. He starts off with an argument of Fred. He's out of Oxford. I'm having senior moments, but anyway, it's this idea that, and this guy's Fred Hoyle. Fred Hoyle had an argument that if the odds of the universe, it's a fine-tuning argument with atheism, that if a tornado passed over a junkyard, it would build a 747. And that argument was made by an atheist, Fred Hoyle. But Richard Dawkins was kind of mocking Fred Hoyle, as I read the book, making fun of him for that argument. And then Dawkins kind of has a very interesting writing style where he kind of wanders all over the place. And so I started kind of just drawing lines where he's going on rants against religion, because that's not an affirmative argument in critical thinking. So I just crossed that. Wherever he went on a rant against religion, he was not supporting his argument, which he's purporting to do. So
Was the argument with the twister, the tornado or whatever, was it the watch, that if someone were to stumble on a watch, there's no way that the watch would have just would have spontaneously, under no influence, just spontaneously coalesced into a watch. There must have been a watchmaker if there's a watch. And simultaneously, a tornado's not going to come through. And then all of a sudden, what comes out of it?
Well, 747 with Fred Hoyle and the Blind Watchmaker, that's another Richard Dawkins book, the Blind Watchmaker. And yeah, it's the idea you come across a watch, there's an obvious designer, there's an obvious watchmaker, but even though you don't know who he is or who she is or anything about them, it's the same concept. And
Hitchens and Dawkins or whoever, they were making fun of that argument, basically. Is that right?
Yeah, he made some kind of cute. Dawkins is a very sarcastic writer. He's an anti-theist. Even Guardian magazine, which is an atheist-leaning publication, kind of says Dawkins is not doing our community any good with his mocking tone. But that's kind of how
When you say anti-theist, explain to viewers and listeners what that means.
Well, there's numerous articles out there that atheism is not immune from having different denominations. There's a lot of different kinds of atheists. And one of them is an anti-theist, which means I'm out to, all religion is bad and I'm out to stop all religion. It's kind of like Stalin and Chairman Mao. Took it on a political level. It's very extreme.
So if you hate all religion and want to take all religion down, you're probably an anti-theist. Right?
Yeah. That's basically it. And yet there's a number of other atheist kind of denominations that I really relate to. I totally get it. In terms of logic and reason and unsupportable arguments and all of that, I resonated when I went through the list. I think there's about 16, all but anti-theism I resonated with at some level.
Do you want to quickly talk about the difference between atheism and agnosticism? Because they're not even on the same spectrum. They're totally talking about two different ways of looking at the world. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our listeners, especially if they're new to their faith crisis, probably just merge atheism and agnosticism as almost being the same thing, but they're actually talking about two very different things. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, sure. If Carah will join me, because I want keep me honest. If I speak out of line, throw some at me. But as I understand it, atheists are sure that they don't believe in God. It's less that they are sure that there is no God, but they're pretty sure in their minds, as an atheist, that they don't believe in a God or have not yet seen compelling evidence that there is a God.
And I think Dawkins has a scale that he invented on like a scale of 1 to 7. Mm-hmm. That sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
And most atheists don't call themselves a 7 out of 7 atheist, where they literally believe there is no God. That's why most fall back on what I call myself, which is an agnostic atheist, which tells you that you can't know for sure that there's no God, but you don't have a belief in a God, is what your atheism is basically trying to communicate.
Well said. Yeah, and I think I get agnostic atheism because in large part I'm also agnostic. I got a lot of questions. Agnostic, to answer your question, John, is I'm questioning. I'm not sure. But I'm a seeker. I'm trying to figure it out. But that's the essence of being agnostic.
Yeah. And if I could just compliment what you guys are saying, think of viewers and listeners that are new to this whole conversation, the way I think about it, one scale is to what extent do you believe in a
Wait,
creator?
I got a great analogy. Can I explain? This is a great analogy.
Sure.
I know where you're going, and I got a better one. And then if you like yours better, go back to yours. Atheists, we're such bitches. So if the question is, do you believe in God? And you have 3 doors. Do you know this analogy, John? That I'm
Go
going
ahead.
with? Okay. He's all mad at me now.
No, I'm not. I interrupt you sometimes.
Oh, that's
It's
true.
actually important that you interrupt me.
Let's somebody make a super combination of all the times John's interrupted me, so I feel better. If the question is, Carah, do you believe in God? If someone's posing that question to me, and the doors that I could pick are yes, no, and maybe, I have to pick the no door because I don't have a belief in God. So that's the atheist question. I don't have a belief in God. But if the question is different, which would be, is there a God? And the doors are yes, no, and I don't know. I have to, if I'm being honest, always pick the I don't know door. We could be in a simulation. There's a million other ways that God could be hiding himself. So to say that I know with a certainty if there's a God or not, I'm not going to pick the yes or no door. I'm going to pick the I don't know door. And that's what makes me an agnostic atheist. It's an I don't know, and I also don't have a belief in God.
Very good. That's great.
Yeah.
And then I'll just provide a similar but maybe a different angle. If you think about the axis of theism, a theist would be someone who believes in a God. An atheist would be someone who doesn't believe in a God, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's shades in between. And then the Gnosticism or the Gnostic spectrum is, to what extent do you believe it's knowable as to whether or not there is a God? And someone who is Gnostic would say it's knowable, whether it's by feeling or the spirit or emotion or whatever. It's knowable as to whether or not there's a God. And an agnostic would say it's not knowable whether or not there is a God. So you can be a Gnostic theist, which is what most Mormons claim to be, which is I know that there's a God. You can be an agnostic theist, which is I believe in God, but I have no idea whether there really is a God. And I don't think anyone can know, but I'm just going on the side of belief. So you can be an agnostic theist, or you can be an atheist, an agnostic atheist, saying I don't believe in a God, but I don't think that anybody really knows for sure. And then the last option would be what would it be? It would be an atheist, a Gnostic atheist, meaning that I know there is not a God. Yeah. I have an absolute certainty that there is no God. I'll have to be honest. Sometimes believers or theists put up a straw man that atheists are just as religious as theists, because atheists are dogmatically claim to know that there is no God. I don't know a lot of atheists who would say that they know there isn't a God. They would just say, I haven't seen the evidence yet. So in that case, it's a bit of a straw man. That's why you're not going to find a lot of Gnostic. I don't even know if Gnostic is the right term, but
it's the right term. Yeah.
A Gnostic atheist. In my experience, you won't find a lot of those people. Most atheists are also agnostic, but don't be confused. You can also be a believer, a theist, and an agnostic.
Yeah.
Is that okay? I didn't add anything, Carah, to what you said. But
I just put in the show notes for anyone listening, there's a chart of the axes that John was explaining. So if you need to see it on paper, look at it on your screen or something.
I would just add a couple things. I agree with all of that kind of layout. There's also deists. Deists believe in a God, but don't believe in a supernatural or an intervening God.
Yeah.
So Neil Armstrong, the first guy to walk on the moon, was a deist.
I've been told that most of our founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson and many of our founding fathers, and this is back in the 1700s, considered themselves deists.
Well, Thomas Jefferson certainly was a deist. He took the Bible and took out all the supernatural, and that was kind of the Thomas Jefferson Bible.
It's basically what Jesus said.
It's what Jesus said, without the resurrection, without the virgin birth. That's kind of what he did. But there are Gnostic atheists. They're rare, but they're 100% certain there is no God, which is absurd.
That actually is it is absurd, because how do you know? You can't prove a negative. So
So the extremes, the way I look at it, the pendulum swings from Gnostic theists I know that there's a God, and I know it's my God, and I know it's not your God.
And your God's wrong.
Well, yeah, and your God's wrong, and my God's right. That's a Gnostic theist. And then the other end of the pendulum is Gnostic atheists, which I know there is no God. Or probably the literature and the articles more identify as the extremist anti-theists, those who are out to destroy all religion. Those are kind of the polar opposites, which, I'm not particularly interested in. Penn and Teller, he was kind of against all religion, but he was so fun and he was so funny that, I didn't really get that conclusion out of him. We were having a fun conversation, but I think we've kind of laid it out there pretty well. Yeah.
Okay. So you're buying all these books, you're giving them all a fair shake.
Yeah.
Did you have a dark night of the soul where you were really questioning Jesus or questioning God? You talked about Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman, many people kind of maybe sometimes in a different way lump him in with some of with these other four horsemen of the apocalypse because it's Bart Ehrman that deconstructs the origins of the Bible and particularly the New Testament.
Yeah. And
he leads a lot of people to basically conclude, well, the Bible's got as many problems as the Book of Mormon, if not more. And so like a David Bokovoy would basically say once he deconstructed the Bible, or once he deconstructed the Book of Mormon, it wasn't super hard to deconstruct the Bible. So talk about if Bart Ehrman was a part of your journey.
Yeah, I read Misquoting Jesus. I thought Bart Ehrman was he's very intelligent. He's agnostic. He's not atheist. I think he's a lot of people, point him to atheism, but I've heard out of his own mouth, he's agnostic. His deconstruction of faith was over the good and evil question, not over the biblical transcript question. Now, what Bart Ehrman has said, and I'm a quasi fan of Bart Ehrman. He said that it's silly to ever suggest that a man named Jesus didn't walk the planet. He's very definitive about that. There's plenty of evidence that a man named Jesus walked
the historical Jesus. He's thumbs up on the historical Jesus.
He's thumbs up on historical Jesus.
And we've had him on Mormon Stories, so we'll include a link to his
Bart
episode.
Ehrman?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I missed that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Check out your episode show notes for the Bart Ehrman link.
I'll make it easy for sure. Yeah.
He gave us 1 hour. We had to do like 5 of his books in 1 hour.
Is that right?
It was a whirlwind, but it was good. It's a classic.
Although that is a class, I got to listen to that. Well, he is very clear that the Bible was a copy of a copy of a copy. There are counter arguments to that, but he makes a good point. Where I don't buy this idea that you can spend 10 hours deconstructing Mormonism and then 10 seconds deconstructing the Bible is that, even Bart Ehrman would agree. Anyone sensible would agree the Bible is a true ancient document. That's not in question here. That's in question with the Book of Mormon, but certainly not the Bible. And when you listen to the counter arguments, I'm happy to go in this direction if you want. They're also very compelling in terms of the fragments that they found and the fact that there's thousands upon thousands of copies, and when they were reassembled, there's numerous portions of the Bible that Christians have identified as showing up, out of nowhere in the third century or the 5th century. That there are Bibles you can buy that identify passages that are not considered legitimate. So the Christian theologians out of Yale, out of University of Chicago, out of Harvard, out of Berkeley, they're not dumb. They figured this stuff out, and they will identify the areas that are sketchy within the Bible.
And you could also say that believe what you want. There is a Palestine.
Yeah.
There is and was a Jerusalem.
Right.
There is and was a Jewish people. There is and was a Roman Empire. There was a Roman Empire. Like, clearly, there's a historical basis for the New Testament and the Old Testament, at least to some degree. There was certainly a Jewish faith prior to 0 AD or BCE or whatever you call it.
Right.
And so, yeah, unlike the Book of Mormon, there's no evidence of any Zarahemla or a Nephi or a Waters of Mormon. That's just appears to all be fiction.
They found Nahum on a rock, though. So what are we doing here? Baptize me again.
Whoops, I think we've all messed up. Yeah,
there is.
back.
They got one. They got one on us.
Well, the point I'm making is, and this is just a suggestion, but with Mormon stories, I hear people, very elegantly and very fast. I'm riveted for 10 hours of their deconstruction of Mormonism. And then they get to Christianity and God and Jesus, and they literally spend 10 seconds, maybe. And
that's how it is for many people.
Well, I realize that, but you know what? If you're going to spend 10 hours on Mormonism, I want to see 100 hours on Christianity. It's a much bigger topic, and there's some really brilliant people at the most prestigious universities around the world that are believers, and it's not the academic term is ignorant dismissal. You can't make an ignorant dismissal of this stuff. It's a big, robust area of research by the top academic institutions in the world. You can't ignorantly dismiss that in 10 seconds. I don't believe. At least I can't do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you read all these books, Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris.
Hitchens, Harris, Dawkins, Dennett. Yeah.
Dennett, and even Ehrman.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you? Did you have that dark night of the soul or not?
No, it was a mix. I thought Dawkins, I really kind of singled him out because his arguments were kind of 1980s. His arguments centered around a lot on Darwinism. So I'll get to that in a second if that's okay. But when let me kind of finish. He started with Fred Hoyle in the 747, and then he had a bunch of anti-religion rants, which I just ignored because they weren't affirmative arguments. And then he went into Darwinism, and Darwinism I'm going to come to in a minute, but frankly, I believe in evolution. I'll just let you know.
So billion-year Earth.
Yeah.
Humans share a common ancestor with primates.
Oh yeah, I went to the Rift Valley. I saw the fossils with my own eyes.
So no global flood, no all animals in the Noah's Ark.
Well, with let's take it one at a time. With Noah's Ark, I think that was probably a metaphor. I think Adam and Eve are probably metaphors. The thing where I feel comfortable being a Christian and saying that is that Jesus talked in parables. I don't know that the Good Samaritan was a real dude walking on a real road. That was a parable. And I think Jesus, by sharing so many parables, made it clear that these are just stories for a moral value. What's literal, what's not literal, whether there's an Abraham or not, whether there's a Noah or not, is really inconsequential to the moral value of what Jesus taught. So I don't get too wrapped up in the axle of those things. Maybe they're real, maybe they're not. Frankly, I don't care because Jesus taught clearly that, and used parables so readily. So I don't have a problem with any of that.
And I'm going to just channel my friend Jennifer that works with us. She's never been Mormon, but almost converted to Mormonism. And she talks to me a lot about her frustrations with Mormonism. And one of her frustrations with Mormonism is its penchant for literalism. Because you go to Episcopals, Episcopalians, Jews, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists, Catholics even, they'll look at you funny if you're trying to make everything literal, everything historical. They're like, you're missing the whole point of religion as soon as you're trying to make everything literal. But Mormonism makes so many grandiose, material and literalistic and fundamentalist. And I say that not in terms of a polygamist, but like a Christian fundamentalist claim, 6,000 year Earth, literal Adam and Eve, literal global flood. It gives you no wiggle room for any middle ground. And that's one of the main ways Mormonism spoils people for religion. And all I'm going to say is these sort of things you're saying about, like, who knows if there really was an Abraham or an Adam and Eve, that's like most Christian denominations these days. Yeah. It's Mormonism and maybe even evangelical Christianity that kind of spoils that pond. Is that true? Did I get that right?
I largely agree with you. I think there's lots of Mormons of different, along different spectrums. I just had dinner with a guy he lives here in Utah. He goes to church every Sunday. He's an atheist. He goes because that's where his kids go in the community and his job, and he can't quit or he's going to lose his job, and everybody in the neighborhood is going to hate him. So he still goes to church. So there's all kinds of people in the spectrum of Mormonism, and a lot of them are quite aware of these issues. On evangelical, it's kind of the same thing. I know evangelicals that are really wrapped up tight. I know some that are just flat out unpleasant and judgmental.
The Bible's perfect. Every word in the Bible's
infallible
perfect.
Bible, all of that. Let's get real. The Bible is not a book. It's not 2 books. It's 66 books. And it didn't come around till 300 AD. So, do you have to believe in the Bible to be a Christian? Well, for 300 years, people believed in Jesus and they didn't even have a Bible. That's kind of more the spectrum I'm in. So and Bart Ehrman's right. It was copied and recopied. Now he says, or Bart Ehrman says himself, that the vast majority were inconsequential changes, losing a comma or, this or that, but of no consequence. But in some areas there were real consequences, and in some areas there was real insertion later by Catholic monks. But that's been largely identified. So it's
but he also, I think we're missing one main thrust of his arguments. You line up the 4 Gospels. Well, first of all, the Gospels weren't written by the people whose names are on them.
Yeah,
I think every thoughtful Christian is going to admit that. But if you line up the Gospels chronologically based on when they were written, you see, and John Larson talked about this in a recent episode we did with him on Mark?
The Gospel of Mark?
Gospel of Mark. We'll add that in the show notes as well. What you find is that the story grows and becomes more fantastic. Jesus goes from sort of in the first written gospel, which I think is Mark, but I'm not sure. Jesus is more of a wise, sage.
Right.
When you get to the end, he's like God himself. And that Bart Ehrman would say that each gospel, the story gets more fantastic, kind of like the fish gets bigger each time the story gets told. Right. That's the other part of it. You see Jesus becoming more and more divine the later and later the account is. Yeah. And that's fair to say.
I think that's fair to say. I would hasten to add, though, first of all, I'm still in this journey. And one big concept in my mind is I can go into court as an expert in real estate damage economics. I can't go into a court as an expert in theology. I'm a sideline expert. You're a sideline expert. Carah's a sideline expert. We're all looking at the experts like Bart Ehrman and others to see what these people who have really dedicated, big swaths of their life to study this stuff. And it's kind of a battle of the experts. So one of the, so I'm always looking at it in that way. And on that particular issue, John, I'm still trying to sort that out, quite honestly. However, I will say that when I read a book called The Language of God by Francis Collins, do you know who he is? Francis Collins is MD and a PhD out of Yale, and he was the director of Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. He controlled a $40 billion a year budget. He's the guy that Bill Clinton introduced in 2020 with the whole human genome project. Yeah. So he's a very powerful, very respected. He's been the director of Institutes of Health through 5 administrations. So Democrats, Republicans both love the guy. And I got this concept from Dr. Collins, and he said, because he is who he is. He's got this brilliance. And he was an atheist for decades, and then he converted to Christianity. And what he says on the question you just posed, which is a legitimate question, he says, the Bible is, the way he put it, there's enough. It's not everything, it's not all there perfectly, but there's enough to get a central theme. And in that regard, he was satisfied with that. Okay. So that's the best answer I got right now.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so you're studying all these books. Did you ever self-identify either internally or externally as an atheist or agnostic, or did you just never even hit that point?
I would say that I hit a point of agnostic, just not knowing. My head's
you're still kind
circling.
Of there.
Yeah,
you're still kind of there.
Well, sure. In a bit large part I am. I still got lots and lots of questions. I'm on a journey. Who knows where I'll be a year from now? But I've seen enough compelling evidence from people that are highly academically trained, as my role as a sideline expert, to feel that 51% of the evidence swings, kind of the direction I'm going, 51% or more. So that's the best way I can put it.
Okay, so what did you start attending churches? Like, talk us through chronologically, the best you can remember, your journey into, because a lot of Mormons are like, we did it, Margie and I, we attended the Episcopal Church, and we're like, don't quite feel it. Okay, Methodist, not quite feel it. Oh, Unitarian, no, not quite good. Community of Christ, and no offense to any of those traditions, they're all lovely traditions,
right?
In so many ways, for us, more ethical, more evidence appreciating, more humane, less bigoted, more inclusive faith traditions, but none of them spoke to us.
Right.
For you, what was your journey to find something that spoke to you?
Yeah. My first church was a Buddhist monastery near my home.
What's it called?
I can't pronounce it. I will find out if you like, but it's real close to where I live. And I started going there because they have a meditation room that everyone's welcome to. And I picked up on meditation in San Quentin. And then my cardiologist, she recommended meditation. If you're into meditation, Sarah Lazar out of Harvard Medical School has published at least a dozen articles I've read on it. So I got into meditation, and I would go to the Buddhist monastery to meditate. And then I have some friends who are Christian, and they said, hey, we don't even go to church. We just have a home study. Would you like to come? I started going and having home, like Bible say, we just each read a chapter and kind of talk about it. And you could say something crazy and you didn't have a pile on. The other thing I want to say, John, some evangelicals are wrapped up pretty tight, but a lot of them are very, very cool. And if you dare say, well, you ought to feed the homeless, they pile on and say, you don't work your way into heaven, or, you shouldn't judge. And, well, you should judge, and you should judge righteously, and I judge righteously. I mean, there's obnoxious evangelicals, and there's really cool evangelicals. There's cool Mormons, and there's Mormons that aren't so cool. There's Buddhists that are jerks, believe it or not, but most of them are really cool. Most people are cool. I learned that when I worked on the LA riots. I'm down in South Central. Most of the people in South Central are good, decent, hardworking, honest, kind people who give you the shirt off their back. It's just a minority in each group that can give the group a bad name. So that was kind of the philosophy I had. I would go entertain anything, and I was doing just that. I was going all over the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bible studies.
Yeah, I did the Bible studies, and then I started the Saddleback Church. Rick Warren's church is real close, and I had, through the years, met so many families that were so cool and so likable and so grounded, and their kids were doing well. I thought, I got to check out Saddleback Church. And I got to back up. When I was in Laguna Beach, there was a homeless man, because Laguna Beach has a lot of homeless people. A homeless man walked in to the foyer and sat down, and I'll never forget when the stake president came out and saw him. The homeless man said something to him, and the stake president just kept walking. And I thought, that's just really, wow, that's not cool. And then later, I started volunteering at the homeless shelter, and I was there to teach a class on goal setting. And I'm just sitting there, and it's a Sunday, and people are kind of coming in. It was both men and women who were coming to the class. And this one guy's sitting there, and I said, how's your day going? He goes, oh, good. I went to church this morning. I said, oh, cool. Because there's lots of churches in Laguna Beach. I said, where'd you go to church? And he said, I went to Saddleback. And I said, Saddleback, isn't that like 45 minutes from here? And he goes, yeah, they send a van around to pick us up. And I nearly fell over, because here Saddleback is sending a van out to all the homeless shelters around to pick up people that can't donate a dime to them. If anything, will be a financial, I don't want to say the word burden, but you know what I mean. It will
cost,
let's be honest. And yet they're sending out vans to pick up homeless people to take them to Saddleback Church. And I sat there just dumbfounded that my church wasn't doing that. I mean, that's what Jesus taught. Give me a break. And I was just in shock. So I was very curious at this point about Saddleback Church. And I started going, and I loved it. I mean, my wife could bring her dog and we could sit outside and they got free coffee and, you know, the sermons were awesome and they play Fender guitars on stage. I mean, it was just a really good experience. It's a huge church. It's a mega church, but I really found it very spiritually uplifting. I really loved it.
Don't they have something with study groups where you go to the big church, but you also have your little, what are those called? How does
Small
that work?
groups. Yeah, I joined a small group. That was cool.
Do they help you find a small group?
Yeah, there's a guy that coordinates it. He says, "Where do you live?" And you know, here's 3 names. Check them out. You know, it's really mellow. It's like if you fit in, you fit in. If you don't, you don't. You know?
And what do you do in the small group with these other couples or individuals?
You can do whatever you want, but typically you watch a video and pause it, and then you kind of discuss or read the verses, and you know, you say a nice prayer, and you become friends with the people. I had them at my house too. I really thought they were awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you get baptized into the Saddleback Church?
Well,
did they do that or?
I went to the pastor and I said, you know, I'm kind of leaping ahead because there's a lot of other religious things that I checked out.
Don't skip over stuff that's
okay.
important.
I won't. What else?
Whatever's important to your journey.
Yeah. I think I've hit most of them. Okay. Jewish, Islam.
No. I'm saying in your Christian journey, so like church shop.
Oh, other churches? Yeah, there was a pastor I'd met down a smaller church. He was really cool. He's very proud that he started with nothing and got it up to 300 people. There were some churches in Laguna Beach. One of the churches has a lesbian minister that I thought was super cool. There's a lot of LGBT affirming churches. And one thing, you know, I want to pause right now because it just came on my mind. There were 2 reasons why I came on Mormon Stories after 5 years of talking to you about it. Number one is that there is a website out there I've never heard mentioned on Mormon Stories. It's gaychurch.org, gaychurch.org. And John's not going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. Put it on the notes.
I'm going to tell her.
I'm teasing you. Yeah, gaychurch.org.
Way ahead of us.
Because I want to tell my LGBT friends and the community that if you don't feel welcome where you are, the Christian church wants you and needs you. And I think it's very important to get that message out that, yeah, there's some yahoos in Christianity. I get that. But most of the people I meet are LGBT, not just tolerant, but affirming. You know, will open you and you can be part of that congregation at any level. And that was one thing I felt very, very compelled I needed to share with your platform.
There's a second.
The second one is going to Boy Scouts, but you want me to mention that? Yeah.
No, we'll say that later.
Yeah.
Really quickly, just in all fairness, Saddleback does not appear on Gay Church, correct?
I looked it up and it doesn't. And that's why I still have a lot of affection for Saddleback Church. They just started ordaining women, which I think is big progress and kind of a break from the Baptist convention. Yeah. But they are not gay affirming. And the other thing is I could not find I was sending them thousands of dollars and then I couldn't find their financials as being transparent. Maybe they are and I don't know about it. But those 2 issues, right now I'm kind of a non-institutionalized Christian, but once COVID blows over, I hope to find the church where I fit in, but it will be LGBT affirming. It will be on the gaychurch.org website, and it will have totally transparent financials. Those are just my beliefs and my criteria for where I'll affiliate. But church can be at the beach with a burrito. It can be in the mountains. It can be, anywhere you want it to be. The early Christians didn't have a cathedral. They didn't have a church. They met in people's homes. They hung out.
Carrie, can you add burritochurch.com to the show notes?
I already own the domain. Have I not mentioned my religion, Taco Bell?
Taco Bell
enough times.
Del Taco's better. They got meatless burritos.
Yeah, John doesn't want to be a cult leader, but I never said I didn't want to.
That's awesome.
Anyway.
Burritochurch.com, everybody. Just kidding. Okay.
Yeah, so right now I've been to Sean McCraney's church, and I'm wandering. I'm not all those who wander are lost. I'm kind of wandering.
So tell us, I want to hear details now because I want to hear how you, should we start with God? Like,
Yeah.
okay. So is that the right place to be where we now just kind of ask you how you put together beliefs in the different components of your faith, or?
Yeah, let's do it. But I want to give you a framework first.
Okay.
The way I did it is I had the egos, logos, pathos, and duos. And then when it came to belief, I had this simple little formula in my head, A, B, C. A is atheist or agnostic. B is believer, meaning I believe in God but without any going further than that. And then C is Christianity. So I kind of went A, B, C, and I started with A. And A was going and hitting and really looking at the best arguments of atheism, particularly from Dawkins. And I just did not find Dawkins' arguments very compelling. I thought, and frankly, I've talked to people that were atheists and referred me to Dawkins, no longer are referring to Dawkins. The jig's kind of up, I think. People are getting tired of that. And atheists need to bring a better game because Dawkins hasn't delivered, in my mind.
Well, what about Sam Harris?
Well, Harris, I like a lot better because, first of all, he went to UCLA, and secondly, he's just a really bright guy, and he's done his best to integrate spirituality and meditation, which is, of course, a Buddhist practice, but he doesn't look at it as a dualistic practice. As far as I understand, he looks at it more like a humanist or a naturalist kind of practice. I used to use his app for meditation. But you read when I read his books, he has little glimpses where he sounds kind of anti-theist, and I'm turned off by anti-theists. I think I live in a live and let live world, my mind, and when people start telling other groups that they shouldn't exist, I don't think that's the direction I want to go.
Okay. So would you feel comfortable addressing how you have worked through some of the main reasons that some people turn to atheism or agnosticism, just not as a way to argue or debate, but just as a way to explain how maybe you've worked through some concerns that other people have not been able to work through?
Well, I'm not down on being agnostic. I'm not even down on being atheist. I think when you
say down on, you mean you're not
I'm
against
not.
it.
I'm not derogatory towards.
Yeah,
those
and I'm
beliefs.
not saying you are. I'm more talking about how you resolved concerns that other people couldn't make work. Does that make sense?
We can start listing them. I can go through the ones in my head.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The concerns over the first one that comes to mind is you're talking about experts in their field like Bart Ehrman, and we're kind of like the sideline people who are just kind of that sounds like you were saying that it's really hard to investigate and know these theological arguments, and we're kind of just taking the opinions of other people who have studied it throughout their lifetime. Is that the kind of representation of what you're talking about with Bart Ehrman?
Well, yeah. I mean, I got to admit to myself, I'm not a theologian,
Yeah.
so I've got to rely on people that have really studied this stuff.
Yeah.
That's
so the
all I'm
first one
saying.
that comes to mind is that if God exists, he gave us a brain that understands rational thinking, and he's asking us to act in a manner that's contrary to that rational thinking by saying that I need an expert to know whether or not he exists. Why can't he give every single creation of his the ability to rationally think through and come to the conclusion that he exists?
Yeah.
And we won't be arguing with you. We're just going to lay out the question.
That's the number one. that
I
comes to
totally
mind.
get it, and I love you guys. I'm happy. I love this conversation, and I love any conversation where people play nice, and even with wildly diverse points of view. Carah, the way I think, I'm the first to admit, isn't how a lot of people think. Because
tell me how you think. That's all I care about.
No. But I come from a legal background of debate and evidence and rules of evidence and burden of proof, all these things, which may be another episode. But that's how I think. But this is another concept that comes from Francis Collins, Dr. Collins from Yale, that I just was talking about, where he kind of addressed that. He says one thing that compelled him to go from atheism to deism and then Christianity was the realization that there seems to be almost a God gene, and there seems to be an innate belief, regardless if you're in India or you're in Russia or you're in South America or the U.S., wherever you are, there seems to be something that draws 92% of the population towards believing in a God. And that's something that's like built and hardwired into our DNA. Now, I don't know that everybody finds that a compelling argument. I think it's got I'm interested in it, but that's how he would answer that question.
So the fact that it's so pervasive and ubiquitous for you is an evidence that there's something to it.
It's an evidence for Dr. Collins, and I can't argue with him, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's how I think of it, yeah.
Okay.
So it is, nobody has to have all the legal strategy thinking the weird way I think in place to, deconstruct or construct the way I do. He's saying that people who are sheep herders in Palestine can figure this stuff out without all the mumbo jumbo kind of stuff.
But with a lot of contradictory ideas about God that if, in my mind, the way I think of it is that there is a creator, then, or a father in heaven, let's say in Mormon terms, then he's a really bad father because he created everything in kind of a deist way. He made this earth spin and then he dipped out, and he's fine with all of his creation, living in it, completely contradictory things, believing things that hurt other people about him, them, whatever. And he's fine with a Bible that has fragments, like you're mentioning earlier, that we have to like pick apart and piece together what he says.
Yeah.
And then the Bible has so many contradictions that go to the very foundations of some of the most evil things that people have used for or against,
justify bad
justify.
behavior. Yeah.
And it makes me think, if there was a God, then he's kind of playing,
Kinda mean.
He's winning at hide and go seek, and he's also would be in prison for neglect. That's all.
So how do you make sense of the fact that the point of view that it's just too confusing and too hard to figure it all out, and no one can come to a reasonable set of agreements?
Yeah. I think, though, first of all, I have to say these are well-articulated, real questions that make a lot of sense. So I just want to acknowledge that right off the bat. Yeah. And there were a couple issues in there. One is on the bad things that happen, or being, God being a bad parent. The way I look at it, from my, weird career and world, is every disaster I go to, which horrific, and take one off the list. I'll tell you the specifics. There's enormous amounts of hate, and there's enormous amount of damage, and even natural disasters. When I was talking about Hurricane Katrina and all the lives that were lost, and I won't even describe what I saw and heard about, but horrific stuff. But what I've always noticed is that the human spirit and love is always bigger than that. So if you put hate at a 5, love will come out at a 6 or a 7. If you put hate at a 10, love will come out at a 12. There's always more in the way of human compassion, people that will take their shirt off their back to save someone else, people that will literally risk their lives to help someone else, just like happened to me in Palestine, or in Israel, where these Muslim guys come out and literally covered my body with theirs while machine guns going on fire. I find that very, very inspiring, that no matter how ugly, how bad, how horrific it is, love always wins. Well, love's always bigger. And that's kind of how I think about it, right or wrong. That's how I think about it.
And you're equating love with God? Like you're saying somehow human expressions of love for you become evidence of some type of divine being or creator being?
I think it's both. I think both parties need some credit for that. Both the humans that had the love and the God that created them. And I think that, the Bible says there's a lot of things that are contradictory. We could spend, 10 episodes on that. But the things that come through loud and clear, Jesus only said one thing was number one. One thing, love God, which means just say thank you, and love your neighbor and love yourself. There's a trilogy there of loving God, loving your neighbor, loving yourself. And the Bible says God is love. And yeah, I think when there's love, I don't care if it's from an atheist. I see that as a really beautiful, positive thing. And I think that our Creator, whether recognized or not, is behind that. That's how I kind of piece it together. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that absolutely does.
Oh, good.
Yeah, when you see good in people, that is inspired from a creator who loved first and loves all and is all loving, and that is all kind of piecing everybody back to one central figure and a deity that you assign godhood to. That's kind of what I hear you saying, but
yeah. And the one other thing you said, Carah, that really I thought was a wonderful point was, you're right. You know, I go to India and I see the monkey god, and I go, you know, there's all kinds of different gods. I totally get that. I think that human beings are doing their best with our 3.5 pound brains to explain something that's really shrouded in mystery and really inexplicable. It can't be explained. So I really don't vibe with people that got it all figured out. I think it's just a really big issue. And in quantum mechanics, why is it that when you take an electron over here and it's all going clockwise, and then you separate one of the electrons and take it 700 miles away, and I'm talking about a real scientific experiment, and then you reverse polarity on the one electron, and then 700 miles away, it immediately reverses polarity. That force in between is a intelligent, creative force that we're all struggling to figure out at some kind of level. And so the more I study sciences and natural sciences and quantum mechanics, the more it reconciles more and more with this idea of a fourth dimension. It was what's called in science, with what religion calls a spiritual dimension. And so I'm never going to mock or put down anybody who's trying to take on these big questions. And I don't care if they call God a monkey god or not. I believe in my God. Just like they believe in theirs, and I respect them. So that's the best kind of download of that question I can kind of give you in a short amount of time.
yeah.
What about when people read the Bible and they find genocide, they find God killing men, women, and children, they find justifications for slavery,
Yeah.
they find anti-LGBT interpretations sometimes, you know, racism, misogyny, homophobia, blah, blah, blah. Just a genocidal.
Let us have our period in the tent, Bible. Come on. Just basic stuff like that.
Yeah.
Gets under my skin.
Weird diet codes. How do you make, if somebody just says, I don't know about a God, but the Bible is just a reprehensible example of morality. And if that's God, especially the God of the Old Testament, that's a non-starter. What do you do with that?
Well, those are the big questions I've been kind of dealing with for the last couple of years. And I got one friend in particular who hits me up with all of that. He's compiled it all into one document. And let's break it apart a little bit. On LGBT, I sat down with the Bible one night, and a lot of Mormons I don't know that they know this, but there's a red letter version of the Bible where all of Jesus's words are in red. And in Christianity, that's usually given prominence over other letters or other words or verses. So starting with LGBT, I sat down with the Bible one night and I said, you know what, if I see Jesus saying something against the LGBT community, I think I'm out. So let's see what happens. And I started reading the red letters, and I made it from one end to the other, and Jesus never spoke a single word about or against the LGBT community in any way, shape, or form.
Ironically, neither did Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
Ironically, or the Doctrine and Covenants.
Well, that's fine. But there are other issues there we could come back to.
I know.
I get your point.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were pro non-traditional family structure, if I do remember.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. No,
Okay, well,
I'm just trying to say, there's even Mormonism, even Mormon scripture does not have justification for homophobia. That's all I'm saying.
Well, at this point in my journey, Mormonism's in the rearview mirror.
I know.
But I get your point.
It's just for the believing Mormons watching. I'm asking you to do the same thing with your scriptures that Randy, you did with the New Testament.
Fair enough. Okay. But what I came away with that was and why I think gaychurch.org makes a lot of sense, is that if this was something really reprehensible or as evil as some people make it out to be, Jesus would have said something about it. He said a lot of things about a lot of things, but he didn't say a word about it. And he also gave us one singular number one. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. Well, my neighbor's gay. He didn't have any carve-out clauses. He didn't have any exceptions to the rule. My neighbor might be incarcerated. My neighbor might be Hindu. It doesn't matter. My job as a Christian is to love that person, try to understand them, and help them out and treat them just as I would treat my own kids, just as I treat myself, the best I can. That's my religion, is that trilogy. There's more to my religion, but that's the core. So in getting to the rest of your question, John, with that kind of magnifying glass, if it doesn't emulate love, if I don't see love, the love of God, the love of fellow humans, the love of myself and self-care, then I'm very comfortable not paying a lot of attention to it. And Leviticus says some crazy things, but I'm not supposed to eat shellfish according to Leviticus. I don't believe that. I don't know anybody that believes that. So obviously people are comfortable dismissing things that don't make sense. But better than that, the lens that Jesus gave himself with number one, with that trilogy of love, that's the magnifying glass I go through the whole thing with.
So when God in the Old Testament tells Israelites to kill men, women, and children and animals,
not buying it.
You just don't believe it.
It's a metaphor for something, or it's just somebody, look, people have been blaming God for their bad behavior for centuries. Millennia. So maybe somebody did something horrible and blamed God for it and wrote it down in a book that got canonized in the Bible. I really don't have the theological background to tell you what it is. All I know is I feel very comfortable dismissing it.
So then what? Okay, so then Scripture must mean something different, because in Mormonism, a literalistic sort of fundamentalist religion as far as orthodoxy or theology goes. Mm-hmm. We're all taught God speaks to prophets. Prophets write what God says down in Scripture. Mm-hmm. So we're not left the liberty to say, oh, it's metaphor. But so you feel comfortable doing that with the Bible?
I feel more than comfortable. And a great teacher I once had, you might have heard of him, his name is John Delusion, taught me a scripture in Luke 17. Do you remember that? Where, lo, here, where's the scribes and Pharisees come to Jesus? Where's the kingdom of God? And is lo here and lo there? And Jesus says, no, it's within you. Jesus sounds very Buddhist if you actually listen to what Jesus says. He says, look inside of you. The messages that we need from God, in my mind, are inside of us, not out there. And Jesus said it himself. I'll go with that.
So you're basically saying that your internal spiritual or religious impulses trump Scripture, trump the Bible, possibly.
I wouldn't quite put myself at that level. I would say I put Jesus at the level where he says, look at everything through the lens of loving God, loving your neighbor, loving your others, and anything else I read in the Bible, I will look through that lens. But he also said, and it goes with me, if I got hatred, I'm not going to look inside of myself and say, well, that's the way to go. I've got to look at myself through that number one lens. So Jesus is numero uno, and I look at everything just through that very simple, straightforward, but very powerful lens.
But you seemed hesitant to confirm what I think is pretty clear that you said. You said that if you find something in the Bible that doesn't feel loving or kind or Christ-like, that doesn't jive with your sense of kindness, you go with the kingdom of God within, which is your conscience and judgment over what's written in the Bible.
Well, let me tell you, I have a 3-8-3 model. The 3 is loving God, loving your neighbor, loving yourself. We kind of covered that. And then looking at loving others, Jesus identified 7, and 8 would be LGBT. But specifically, Jesus, I got a little list here. I'll write it, check it out. Jesus said, children, you got to put Jesus in the time frame he was in. The Roman Empire was going off. They were brutal and horrific, and children were considered throwaway. There was a letter as I was reading all these books, there was a letter that just stuck in my mind where a Roman soldier wrote home to his wife and said, if it's a boy, send her into the best schools. If it's a girl, throw her away. That's the brutality of society when Jesus was walking the planet. And he reversed course on that entirely and said, bring the little children, suffer them not to come unto me. And he said, whoever offends them, it's better a millstone be hung around their neck. Jesus was counterculture to the max when it came to protecting children. That's why I resonate so strongly with Sam Young's cause, because it's about the kids and hands off the kids, both with verbal abuse, overt, covert abuse. Let the kids grow up and enjoy their childhoods.
Okay.
So that was number one.
Okay, that's children.
Okay. Then Jesus was famous for saying, if I was thirsty and you gave me drink, I was hungry, you gave me meat, I was naked, you clothed me. Jesus obviously had profound concern for the homeless, for those who are poverty-stricken. And that's where I enjoy so much going into the homeless shelters. Again, I'm not Mother Teresa, but I do make an effort. And that is who Jesus told us, and asked us the question, are you really helping these marginalized people because they're having a hard time? Again, in his culture, when the Romans were, doing their thing, if you're poor or starving, who cared? You were just tossed to the side. The next one is prison. Geez, I was in prison and you visited me. And that's why I love going back to prison, because I do it, frankly, kind of for selfish reasons, because I get so much out of my visits. The inmates hopefully get something out of the visits, but that's the stuff Jesus is really teaching. That's the essence of what he's teaching. I don't think it gets really complicated.
Okay, children, homeless, prison.
And the next one was race. He said, take the gospel. He kind of rolled it out in a roll out, but he never said, Jesus never said anything that justified racism or priesthood just for, everyone but the blacks. Jesus made it clear through the story of the Good Samaritan to be kind and respect everybody as brothers and sisters, regardless of race.
Now, some people, I think, who are kind of into the Bible are going to maybe call you on that one and say that there were people that he said he came to preach to, and there were other races or cultures of people, publicans or whatever, I don't know, Gentiles, basically, Jews and Gentiles, where he's like, I'm not preaching to them right now. They would say that there was, or in the Old Testament, there's a real clear vibe of God's chosen people, which were the Jews,
right?
And then people that weren't chosen, which is Philistines or, Babylonians or whatever.
Yeah.
But some would say, come on, the Bible's racist, including condoning slavery.
Well, slavery is another issue we can come back to, but on the race issue, I drilled down into that because my buddy from BYU, he sent me that as well. And what I think Jesus, first of all, Jesus had kind of a sense of humor, but the way I read those verses, and I don't have them in front of me, but it's basically he was toying with the woman and saying, I'm not really sent to you. And then she said something like, well, even the dogs have crumbs to eat that fall off the table. And then he went ahead and blessed her. So I think it was more of a teaching lesson for everyone where he kind of set it up like, I'm not going to do it. And then he did. The bottom line is he did reach out to that woman in that particular
So in your
Bible
reading
verse.
of the Bible, God isn't saving his blessings or his teachings or Jesus for certain select elite groups of people and leaving out other groups of people or, making them second-class citizens. That's not how you read the Bible.
The way I read the disciples' charge at the end is he said, spread the gospel to everyone. I didn't see any carve-out clauses. So yeah, there might have been a rollout. And there was that verse where he ultimately did help the lady, I think, for teaching reasons. And maybe there's more. If there's something I'm missing, I'm happy to look at it. As I always say, I may be somewhere else in a year. But as I went through those verses, I think Jesus' message is very, very clear that, love everyone. It couldn't be clearer than that.
Okay. So that's how you
Yeah.
view the Bible and Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the sick and disabled, I was, the Jesus's brilliance, and let's pause for a minute and point out, Jesus was so profound in what he taught. He split time in half. We measure everything from before Christ and after Christ. I know we've given it new names, but that's a pretty powerful message. So it doesn't make sense that Bart Ehrman, taking his points on steroids, that the Bible's just such a mess, you can't get anything out of it. And yet Bill Maher, says, well, he's an atheist, that Jesus, he can't find a more profound religious or philosopher of any kind more than Jesus Christ. He goes on to say it's a shame that Christians don't follow him, and I kind of agree with him in part on that. But you can't have your cake and eat it too and say the Bible's a mess, and yet Jesus's messages came through so brilliantly that it split time in half, and Bill Maher, an intelligent atheist, has that to say about him. It's one of the, you can't have it both. So I think enough of the Bible came through that the messages came clear.
And so sick and disabled, you're saying what? Visit the sick and...
Yeah, visit the sick. I was sick and you visited me, I think is what it says. I mean, this is all from Matthew 25.
Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful passage. What's intriguing to me is it wasn't even clear when Jesus is talking to these people that these people even knew who Jesus was. And he says, when did we ever do these things to you? And it's like, well, when you do it to the least of these, my brethren, you do it to me. That's why I think God, ultimately casts a very wide net over loving people. I know some evangelical extremists will take issue with that, but that's how I read this. Is that God is very generous. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. So what can we do, to always make sure people, feel welcome? And then women, I mean, that was profound. In Jesus's time, what you think, while this battle has not been won yet, at least in my mind, I think women need a more elevated role everywhere. My cardiologist is a woman, and I didn't even mention when I was a kid, I had open heart surgery. My cardiologist then was a woman. So and my flight instructor was a woman. The women I really depend on for my life are women. I've never had this hang up in my head. But in Jesus's time, women, you didn't even speak to them. So when he spoke to that woman at the well and other stories, Jesus obviously shattered that brutal Romanistic Jewish empire thinking and made women what they should be, highly respected. And I think Jesus taught us these principles 2,000 years ago, but we're still having trouble catching on to some of the stuff today.
And John Larson talks about that in our recent episode with him in the Gospel of Mark, how it's indisputable that Jesus appears to women, according to the Bible, at least one of the books of the Bible, maybe two, that women are the first people that Jesus appears to after his resurrection. It's clear that he was very close with several women. Mm-hmm. It's even possible that some of his apostles or disciples were women, mm-hmm. and that subsequent church leaders kind of changed the names and the characters to be masculine. Mm. So there's some really good stuff on women having a much even more prominent role in Jesus's life than what many of us are led to believe as Christians. But what do you make of Paul's verse in the Bible that women should stay quiet in the church? Some mention that as a problem.
Yeah, I've read that verse a few times. I don't like it, and I kind of chalk it up to, does this pass the love God, love your neighbor, love yourself rule? And I don't think it really does. Maybe it was a cultural thing back then. Maybe he thought he was being progressive, but
So for you, Scripture can be wrong.
I don't believe. Yeah, sure. The Bible, I don't believe is infallible. Okay. I think it's authoritative. I think it's inspired, but I don't think it's infallible. And if it doesn't pass the love God, love yourself, love your neighbor, I don't have any problem kind of putting aside. I think God and Jesus, or Jesus himself, made it clear what the priority is.
Question.
Yeah.
May I ask? So I'm picking up what you're putting down. That the God that is. I always try to go back to the nature of God, and I think everyone has a type of DIY God in their head of them kind of ascribing what their highest values are.
Yeah.
And whether you want to call it like projecting or if that's literally what God really is, and I just don't know. But
Yeah.
I wanna keep digging here of the type of God that you're describing here. And I really like that idea about, those tenets. But to me, I just want to ask, John was mentioning all of the problems and the genocides, and there's so many things that have been used authoritatively as a bludgeon to hurt so many people with in the Bible. It feels like the God you're describing, it would be better for his reputation to never have anything to do with the Bible. That he could have written a much better book for an instruction book for humanity. That if that Jesus exists, that I would love for that Jesus to exist. Why would he allow so many wrong things to be not only said in his name that he said, but then used for so many years without any kind of course correction? That, hey guys, you got this wrong. It was kind of a one time, I'm going to come down to earth 2,000 years ago. This is my gospel. And I'm going to let people tweak it. I'm going to let people use it for monetary gain.
Right.
I'm going to let people. The Old Testament is just. There's a book by one of my favorite authors, Dan Barker. Have you read his books?
I've heard his name, but I haven't read his books.
He has some great books. He's a former pastor, minister as well. He has a book called God, the Most Evil Character in All of Fiction, I think, is a book. And it's like that big, and it's literally every single...
Let's add that to the show notes.
Yeah, it's literally... He went through the entire Bible, and he wrote every single one where God wants us to know his character. And it's 9 out of 10. It's some really horrific passages. And so my question to you is, how do you, if that God does exist, why does it need to be like Jesus Christ? Why can't you live those principles outside of assigning an actual deity to this person who possibly lived 2,000 years ago named Jesus that walked around the Middle East?
Yeah.
Can you live those principles without having to call yourself a Christian because of there's so many things that God, to me, if that God exists, he is therefore an evil God, because he allows so much to be done in his name that he hasn't corrected. Does that make sense?
I want to have you separate. I heard you ask at least two questions. One is, can you be moral and ethical without God or without the Bible? But then why did God allow the Bible to be so effed up? I was going to say in a different way to ask the same question. I was going to say, man, it sounds like you're a buffet Christian. Like you take the stuff you like and you leave the stuff you don't. And I know a lot of evangelical Christians, for example, that would just say, that's not Christianity, brother. You're picking and choosing. You're more making God after your own image than you are.
I'll fight anyone who says that they're not a buffet Christian or whatever. I think everyone has a DIY God.
I know, yeah. I just wanted Randy to be able to just, from his perspective. Sounds like you're picking and choosing.
Well, I am picking and choosing. I own that. But I would say I'm picking and choosing with the number one lens that Jesus himself identified as number one. And he specifically said number one. So yeah, I'm picking and choosing through a 2,000-year-old book that has a profound wisdom intermixed with some things that just have you shaking your head, shaking my head at least. And so how do you sort it out? You just go to number one, and I would dispute any Christian that says that they're living every bit of it, because there are areas that are clearly contradictory. So give me a break. Let's get real here. So, but like I say, like Dr. Collins says, there's enough here, at least in my mind. And clearly, some of the stuff that's crazy is crazy. You call it crazy. And some of it's a metaphor. Who cares? The real message here is, love God, love your neighbor, love yourself, care for these people in marginalized society, respect women, and respect children, and just that's the message. That's the religion. And I don't think it gets horribly more complicated than that. And you want to get me into a courtroom? Yeah, sure, I'll debate these evangelicals all day long that take these extreme positions, because give me a break. It takes you 15 minutes to find two verses in the Bible that contradict each other. And it gets silly with some of the somersaults to reconcile that. I bypass that and say there's 66 books in the Bible here, and I don't have any problems saying I'm fine with 65, if I need to take one out. That was a man-made decision. I think it's inspired, but maybe I'm overstating my point a little bit, but give me a break.
Okay.
You know.
Another question I have.
But I think Carah had another question.
I want to make sure, maybe I need to restate my question a little bit better. Has more to do with you, in your view, Jesus is the ultimate moral authority on what to do, how to live your life by loving God, loving your neighbor. But in my estimation, a God would not want to be even associated with the things that are in the Bible, and I cannot view Jesus, no matter how many good things he taught, I can't view him as a moral person, let alone a moral deity that I should worship and attribute God to, because it would be better for him to never even have any association with the Bible. Does that make sense? Do I need to restate
get what you're
it again?
saying, and I've never heard it expressed that way. I think you make some interesting points. I think if you break it down, the New Testament is a lot less problematic than the Old Testament. Are we agreeing on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have studied the New Testament. I used to cherry pick a lot of the beautiful passages in the similar way, but I still think that an argument can be made just from the New Testament alone, or just from the Book of Mormon alone. If you single out any kind of theology that separates God, it's not a moral deity to me that gives people bad information and expects them to follow it with the brains that they created in us. You following me?
Yeah.
And then expects for us to decipher fact from fiction because again, I don't believe in free will. Sorry, everyone. But in a way that then there's a final test that we don't even know that we're taking that will separate us from our creator with devastating consequences. So just on
For
the theology,
eternity.
for eternity. Yeah. So just based on the theology of the New Testament alone and the system set up by God, like God sacrificing himself to create a loophole, to forge a path out of a loophole that he created, like that theology. I'd love for you to speak to your belief in like a little crucifixion and resurrection in a second as well. But yeah, all I'm trying to say is just from a New Testament perspective, I still think that it's too morally abhorrent of the God that Jesus is asking us to worship. I can't remedy that.
Well, I mean, I got your point much better with the Old Testament, but on the New Testament, again, I look at the red letters and give priority to them.
What Jesus said.
Yeah, what Jesus said directly, or at least it's attributed to Jesus directly. And I from the stuff I've been through, that's the really give me a break kind of stuff, was almost entirely from the Old Testament. But maybe you could refresh my memory, or maybe I could go back and look again what was in the New Testament, because I don't think the New Testament is, I wouldn't use the word abhorrent. I can't think of, can you think of something abhorrent in the New Testament?
Give me a second. I'll come back to it. What I was just trying to say is more of the system. If God has designed a system in my mind that he wants us to learn from, animal sacrifice and blood atonement, that to me, I would use the word abhorrent. That's a moral system that he's trying to train us and teach us that's what he cares about and he values is blood sacrifice.
And that's kind of the Jewish way. Christ transcended that.
Yeah.
So that's Old Testament. And I think even the atonement theology that Mormonism passed on to us, there's a lot of Christians that say that whole Jesus had to suffer X, Y, and Z to balance all the sin. There's a lot of Christians that don't buy that theology. So some of that.
Yeah, atonement theology is super fascinating, but that's what we'll have to.
Saying you don't
we could
have
be here all day, but
yeah.
Well, I hear what Randy's saying is if you focus on the red letters, which is what Jesus actually said, Randy's not finding a lot that's abhorrent there. And that's the answer I heard from Randy.
That's part of it.
And
then you're right. In Christianity, I don't hear much about, and certainly nothing like the Mormon theology on the atonement. What I hear more about is the death and more importantly, the number one thing I hear about that's more evidence-based is the resurrection. And there's there's a book that, the case for Christ is by Lee Strobel. He came out of Yale Law School. He puts together kind of a courtroom case with the evidence for and against the resurrection that I found pretty compelling. I found parts of what he said brilliant, and to me it comes down to the resurrection. And there's two things. One is documents of antiquity. The Bible, whether anybody believes it or likes it or not, it would pass, in my mind, the legal rules of evidence. It would be admissible in court as a document of antiquity. So it passes that test. And the other thing that gets into rules of evidence are eyewitnesses. And you got, well, you guys can ask yourselves any questions you want. But for me, I ask myself the question, why would these people who are eyewitnesses to the supposed resurrection march off knowing that the Romans are going to feed them to lions? And Romans were brutal. They must have seen something. Now, the counter argument is, well, people flew jets into the World Trade Center. I mean, I worked on that case. But Lee Strobel makes a really strong argument that downwind, the people downwind of these miracles tend to be more wrapped up into the fanaticism of beliefs, whereas those who are eyewitnesses, if they didn't actually see it or it was a hoax, they wouldn't march off to their deaths. So there's something, whether ultimately people find it compelling or not, I think the argument is strong that there's something there in terms of the eyewitnesses and the people that said they saw the resurrection, because they really put their money where their mouth was. And that was, I thought, pretty compelling evidence. Lee Strobel does a much more masterful job of laying out the evidence. So I'm trying to paraphrase, but those are the kinds of things I'm going to research these kinds of questions.
When we talk about the Jefferson Bible and the red letters being Jesus's words, what Jefferson leaves out are the miracles. So the healing of the blind, healing of the lepers, the literal resurrection where his body is resurrected with his spirit. The turning the water into wine, the walking on water. What do you make? And we would all say, nobody's doing that these days, and nobody seemed to do it before. So what do you make of the miracles? Do you kind of throw them out as being kind of outside the red letters, or are you on the side of tending to believe that all those kind of supernatural, fantastical things happened, even though there isn't a lot of that by some people's account going on today?
Well, I love the fact that Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine. So,
because you like wine,
sure, if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. The miracles, that's a good question, John. I hadn't thought of that. I probably want to just say, let me think about that and get back to you. But I don't have a particular problem with Jesus doing miracles, and I don't know that I've had some things that might be classified as miracles. But I've talked to many people that feel strongly they've seen bona fide miracles. So I think there's, the science world calls it translogical and the religious world calls it supernatural. To me, they're the same thing. There are things that do happen, even according to science, that cannot be explained logically. And science admits that, and religion certainly espouses that as well. So I think that there are miracles. I don't think that God is as intervening as some people think he should be or she should be. I don't know that God is necessarily a gender, creative, intelligent force. But that being said, that's the best answer I've got as I sit here. Okay.
So you tend to think that there are miracles. You're okay if you find out that Jesus performed miracles.
Well, yeah, and Dr. Collins says that he says that God or Jesus is not necessarily intervenes a lot. He can, but he doesn't a lot. But again, I've talked to people that have seen they're not my stories to share, but I've talked to people that claim miracles. I don't have any reason to disbelieve them.
Do you have a theology for why God would choose not to intervene and heal?
I remember we were having lunch, you and me, John, once, and you said, you look at the picture of the Earth and it spans back, and then you see it in the solar system and it goes back, and you see our solar system part of the universe and it goes back, and then we just become a barely negligible dot. And I think the same principle that you taught me applies to that question. I think our time on Earth is remarkably short relative to the, eternities. And I think we're here for a fascinating test that's not always very pleasant, and it's very, very messy. But that's kind of my best answer on that one. I think, I love life. I loved your metaphor you said in another podcast the other day where, religion, some people consider it kind of seasoning on life, but you live life, you enjoy life. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, I enjoy going and exploring and traveling and, doing lots of stuff. And religion is kind of a seasoning that makes it interesting. It's kind of an investment in the future kind of thing.
Okay. All right. So you've got the low threes.
Yeah.
And I'm really, of course, we thrive in the low threes here on Mormon Stories. We thrive on highlighting the low threes here on Mormon Stories podcast.
Well, I know.
I just read it and I was like,
here we go.
You just woke Carah up. Carah was napping.
No.
I'm kidding.
It's my favorite Mormon Stories of all time. I love talking about this kind of stuff. I love. And thank you for being so authentic, because I am, girls and boys and non-binary people at home, you're talking to a hardened atheist over here, but I want to have as many conversations with people to pick their brain of why they believe the things they believe. So this is definitely not easy to try to explain into a microphone some of your most deeply held beliefs. So thank you, Randy, for
thanks, Karen. I'd love to pick your brain too, because I know you got a lot of insights that I probably need. These concepts, well, let me just say real quickly, if I can, before I get to the low three, the language of God, Francis Collins, is where I got a lot of ideas that I have. Seeing is believing. This guy was he's a PhD from Cornell, and then he taught at Harvard. He taught physics. He was an atheist, Harvard physics professor, and now is Christian. His name is Michael Gillian. The Case for a Creator, Lee Strobel out of Yale Law, and The Person of Interest is by Wallace out of UCLA, where I went. So I want to kind of give a quick attribution. To the extent I've made sense, I would attribute to them. To the extent I don't make sense, I'd attribute it to me. So,
we'll get all that on the show note, show notes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is what pissed Jesus off. And, Jesus was very kind, very loving, and he certainly pointed out the neglect that we have as a society. And by the way, that's an indictment, not just, we should all, whether we're atheists or agnostic or deist or theists, we should all, I think as a society, do way more than we're doing to help the marginalized. But what really upset Jesus, number one, was flipping tables, monetizing temples and flipping tables. I mean, that story is iconic, where Jesus went in and saw the temple being monetized, and he was really raging mad. And that made me really respect Jesus as not just being kind of a hippie flower child. He was, he dished it out when he needed to. I thought that was cool. What do you think?
Yeah. So you're not big on $1 billion churches, basically.
Absolutely not. The kind of church I think I'll ultimately land at,
or the prosperity mega churches.
No. That wasn't. If anything, Jesus was not materialistic. Jesus was taught against materialism, and that kind of stuff is just absurd. And I would identify with a church where the pastor drives an old beat up red truck. In fact, I was just having a conversation this morning with a pastor in Nashville. I had lunch with him recently, and he's very proud of the fact 70% of the money that comes into his church, it's not a big church, it's a medium-sized church, they've adopted a community in Haiti with the hurricane, and 70% of the money and their labor goes out to help rebuild this community. That's cool. I can get behind that. But people that enrich the organization and themselves, that's not the Jesus I'm digging.
Okay. That's number one.
Yeah. Number two is when it came to sex, what really set Jesus off were pedophiles and millstones around necks. And that's, again, why, Sam Young's work is so important. And I think that's right on the money. I think we've kind of covered that.
What about, and I don't want to make sure this isn't three. Yeah. So what about churches that sort of demonize sex, demonize sexuality, infuse a lot of deep shame for things like masturbation or premarital sex. And again, we get a lot of people thinking that Mormon Stories is pro-porn. That's not the way I see it. Or that we're pro-premarital sex. That's an unfair characterization of what I think we're for. I've even had people go, John, I've stopped listening to Mormon Stories because you seem to be for wanton, unrestrained sex with everything and anything. And they're talking to a guy who's had sex with one person his whole life.
The co-host of Mormon Stories, not only do we get accused of being in an affair, and we already did an entire episode about all the slander we get, but just the fact that, like, John, you see this guy over here? Look at this guy. Look at this. Look at his little, like, button up. This guy, this one is, like, for all these, like, libidinous affairs and porn and stuff. Not John DeLynn and not Cara Burrell either. Let me set that record straight. Continue.
But religions have kind of built a business. Thank you for that, Cara.
Your button up is great, by the way.
Thank you.
You look fabulous.
But religions have built almost an entire business model around sexual shame. So it's not that we're for sexual irresponsibility, but do you have thoughts about that as you talk about sex?
Well, yeah, I do. In my sociological work, unrelated to any of this, I came up with a long time ago, and I didn't come up with it, but I recognize body, mind, and soul. That's holistic. That's very healthy. And money is great. I like money. Sex is great. I like sex. Power is great. I like, having my little power trips here and there, I guess. But what corrupt people and corrupt organizations do is they take a holistic mind, body, and soul where there's normal sexuality, and they extract out of that sex, power, and money. That's where I, as a sociologist, the big red flags go up that says something sketchy here if the emphasis is on sex, power, and money. Now, on the get into your question on sex, I think Jesus was clear he was against being promiscuous, and there's Bible verses that are clear on that. That's just, and obviously there's a target. A lot of I never knew this in Mormonism, but in Christianity, I think I learned it the first day. The word sin is an archery term that simply means you aimed your arrow at the target and the arrow fell short of the target. That's all it means. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you thrust into hell. It just means you fell short of your goal, but you had the goal. And I don't think that, people make mistakes, including sexual mistakes, and it's not the end of the world either. But yeah, should we avoid being promiscuous? That's probably a really good idea. I think we can probably all agree there. Okay. That's as far as I think it kind of goes. And people make mistakes, and we don't need to browbeat them and shame them and put them through rigorous ordeals. That's a matter between them and God. And looking directly to God is far more sobering than worrying about what you have to say to a bishop, because the bishop's doing stuff worse than others even did. So I'm kind of kidding around, but it's a whole new sobering experience. That's how I think about him.
Okay.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
How do you define promiscuous? Just sleeping with as many people as two people consent to feeling like? Or how do you define promiscuous? And then what do you think are the downsides and what Jesus was trying to teach about promiscuity?
I haven't really, how I have defined it, I don't really have it. I think we all kind of know what that looks like. At least I think I do. But, and what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
What do you think Jesus was trying to teach by the downsides of promiscuity?
Well, unwanted pregnancy is obviously a big one. I met a lot of people in prison. Promiscuity and rape and all these illicit behaviors. I'm not saying I think we all agree rape is horrible, but there are consequences with diseases and unwanted pregnancies that is a completely secular idea that I think reasonable religion would agree with. I think we can all agree that, sex is a good thing, but taken too far, becoming, too promiscuous, there's too much promiscuity can become problematic too. I think there's a balance and people have to figure that out.
Satisfying to me.
Okay. We're agreeing.
Yeah. Boom. We're fine. Boom. I mean, you're talking to the girl I was so Christian. I used to listen to those things about, still things that resonate to me, which would be objectifying people as a Christian, I didn't like the idea of objectifying another person, whether that was through porn or in a sexual relationship. You should be making love to somebody and not objectifying them, whether you're married to them or you're watching them on a screen. And I've had to evolve on that a little bit because I have realized that some people want to be objectified and some people, they don't have the same conditioning that I had, that, that piece of duct tape that sticks on one other person. I used to believe that as a Christian, and I don't think I believe that quite as much anymore. I think that's more of a conditioning of a religious standpoint, that sex is always this binding thing, and that you're always, you know what I'm talking about, John? Like that idea that two people, when they commit to have sex, those are the only two people you should ever have sex with. That there's a lot of like religious indoctrination and propaganda that is probably holding up those studies that say that that's the healthiest way to live a life. And our listeners can inform me on what the science says now. So I just wanted to pick Randy's brain on what he thought on that subject.
I ultimately think that John Delynn's way of one beautiful woman for life is, that's the ideal. I think that's just, that's just terrific. But people fall short, and it's not the end of the world, is what I'm saying. And I think the Christian path, is a forgiving path, and where people do make mistakes, you dust yourself off and go on. That's how I see it.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
The John Delynns and the Aaron Burrells of the world, they got to figure it out. Beautiful.
I'm not a role model. I'm doing the best I can, though. But thank you, all of you. All right, what's your third low three?
Yeah, my third low three. Well, Jesus was pretty down on his church leaders, specifically the scribes and Pharisees, where it was about power and that kind of thing. And in other words, Jesus was he stood up to the bullies and the bad guys, and he identified them. And the pedophiles, the scribes and Pharisees, and the those who monetized religion. Religions need to pay their bills. I get that. But to make it a path to enormous profit, that's not really what Jesus taught at all. And that's kind of the extent of my religion. The top three,
God, neighbor, and yourself, unconditional love.
Yeah, and then the 8.
Children, homeless and poverty, prison, race, being for all races, anti-bigotry, racial bigotry,
right.
For the sick and disabled, for strangers, for women, for LGBT. And then what pisses God off? Yeah,
monetizing religion, pedophiles, and church leaders, scribes, and Pharisees.
Kind of religious hypocrisy and abuse of power.
Sure.
Yeah.
But those are my 3-8-3 kind of way of thinking. But I want to be clear that I do believe, I don't have evidence, I can't prove it, but I do believe that Jesus was resurrected. I do believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I believe he's the way, but I think he also casts a very wide net. And if people want to burn sage, or they want to light candles, or they want to wear temple garments, or they want to play with rattlesnakes on Sunday, if that brings you closer to God, genuinely brings you closer to God, and inspires you to reach out to the marginalized in society, then go for it. You'd certainly have my support and respect, but that's kind of where I've landed on my Christian belief.
All right. I got another good follow-up.
Yeah.
Wanting minds must know. So do you believe that God is the one truth, the Jesus that you ascribe to, at least, that is the one way back to heaven, that, every knee shall bend and profess that Jesus Christ is Lord? Or are there other alternative ways to get to God? Or does everyone need to convert to Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the best answer on that, I would draw on C.S. Lewis, that says that there is a heaven, there is a hell. I do believe Jesus is the one true way. But that all being said, that there's a bus that goes from hell to heaven every 30 minutes. You just can't take any luggage. You got to leave the hate behind. You got to leave the sin behind. You got to leave, your garbage and baggage behind. And I would probably just go with C.S. Lewis there on that one. So yeah, I think he's the way. But I think, like, I'm always kidding around with you, John, and some of the other guys, that I think you're doing God's work. Anytime you turn on the lights and tell the truth, and anytime you're helping marginalized people heal from trauma, I don't care what the semantics are. I think that's God's work. And I get pile-ons from evangelicals when I say that, but that's just what I believe. I think God's work can be performed by even those atheists who are feeding the hungry and giving something to drink to the thirsty. That's how I believe, and I'll let God be the judge. And that's just kind of how I roll. So yeah, I'm very, I always welcome people that have the same value system, whether we have the same beliefs or semantics or labels. I care less about. I don't care. I'm not saying I don't care. I care less about it. I mean, I care less about that than getting the right labels.
So you're not somebody who, instead of just handing out Book of Mormons on a plane, you're handing out Bibles on a plane anymore?
No, I got my cues there from Mrs. Fender. I kind of feel like I'm just gonna be me, good or bad, right or wrong. I'm just gonna be me. If someone has questions, I'll answer them. That's how Mrs. Fender was. Backstage with the rock stars and the country stars, she wasn't preaching ever, but she loved Jesus and everybody knew it. But she was not offensive in any way. She was just a wonderful, loving person. I'm not saying I'm like her, but that's what I'm kind of shooting for.
What about the idea that this is the good news, this is the gospel, and it would be a huge mistake. You would not be living up to your Christian duty to make sure that everyone hears about the good news, and that you do need to be preaching and telling people about Jesus.
Yeah. I think it is good news. I mean, when I became, one thing that Rick Warren said that really resonated with me is when you kind of give it over to God, that you get forgiveness for your sins, you get a purpose in life, and you get a place in heaven. I like those. I like that. That rings true for me. And then I look at the science and the evidence, which we haven't really got into, but I'm happy to at another time. But that's kind of how I look at it. I hope I'm not coming across as preachy. I'm just kind of telling my story.
That's what I want. Yeah.
But if it resonates with somebody, great. I share more. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We can still be friends. Come to my barbecue. I don't care. That's just kind of how I'm rolling now.
What I really liked that we talked about at lunch was just the concept of dogma and authoritarianism, and that we're coming from a religion that has a restored gospel and a prophet who kind of already has the right answers that you just need to fall in line with. And so I can see how that is just not an appealing gospel, and the way that you just laid out your big 8 and your low 3, how you would be feeling so so kind of repulsed by the Mormon gospel version of the Christian, and then versus the Christianity that you've embraced now. So can you speak to a little bit more about why even if Mormonism was, even if you didn't read the Gospel Topics essays that you mentioned that you did, it sounds like to me that you're fundamentally against the principles of the way that the Mormon gospel is set up, and that you are just more open to this less dogmatic version that Christianity kind of speaks to your soul. That's kind of what I see.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to answering that. First is, I'm against dogma. Whenever I hear somebody, whether on any podcast or anybody that's dogmatic, that knows they got it right to the exclusion of room for anyone else, that I'm not for. And that goes for both Gnostic theists and anti-theists.
Sure.
We've kind of covered that. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second
part? Is, I can ask it in a different way. So many Christians want Mormons to come into the true Jesus, the grace-filled Jesus. And so it sounds like even if you didn't even find some of the truth claims that you knew about Joseph Smith and the polygamy, that your soul, your spirit is just not in tune with this dogmatic authoritarian version of a gospel, that you were seeking after something else.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I don't know if it was on your podcast here, but somewhere I heard the concept of punch up but don't punch down. That really resonated. I want to be crystal clear. I don't punch down. I will never fault there are people far better than me and far more faith in Christ than me who are in the Mormon church, And I fully acknowledge that. And I fully acknowledge that heaven, if there is a God, and I believe there is, and if there is a heaven and a hell, I believe there is. I believe there are plenty of atheists and Mormons, agnostic and Hindus that, God is not going to be militant. If God is what he says he is in the New Testament, he's very kind and forgiving. And I believe there will be plenty of Mormons in heaven. But punching up, I see stuff there that doesn't resonate, that is really, really troubling to me, and really unfortunate. I think the Mormon Church has a really uphill battle with their agenda to make the church grow and hang on to this. Never apologize for the race issues and hold on to this LGBT. The young people today are just too smart. They get it. And that's just not a message that's going to resonate going forward. We'll see what happens, but I think I would never punch down. I would never say anything derogatory towards a Mormon or a Hindu that believes in the monkey god. That's their beliefs, and I'll respect them. But yeah, the leaders of any dogmatic theology that are Gnostic, I would love to debate them, but I don't think they're ever going to show up.
All right.
That answers that, by the way. Thanks.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the most important things that I think Christians and Mormons are always discussing, debating over is, this authoritarian version of Mormonism versus, this very, there's so many versions of how you can construct a God, but I have nothing but the most respect for, the way that you've laid things out and the way that you came to your beliefs. And so that's always the biggest debate, I feel like, is just Mormons and Christians going back and forth. And so just kind of wanted to pick your brain, but that is a satisfying answer. So
I used to get into those debates when I was a Mormon missionary, and I look back and I think that was just a waste of everybody's time. I think we do better when we say, instead of spending with that time in the debate, why don't we both go to the grocery store and get some groceries and go to the homeless shelter? That's a better use of time and money. The temple recommend, give me a break. Do you support this and do you support that? Do you pay this? Do you pay that? Do you wear this? Do you wear that? This question should be, are you kind? Are you loving? How do you care for the LGBT community? How do you treat women? How do you treat children? The stuff about, I'm not into porn. I'm sorry. I'm just not into it. But people that are, how can we help you, develop more healthy relationships? That should be the question rather than, shaming people over whatever mistakes or shortfalls that they have. I just don't get that whole thing. I really don't.
Randy Bell's temple recommend questions.
They'd be wholly,
this
they'd
is
be
a TikTok
completely
clip,
different.
Carah.
Yeah, I always love that because I always want to know what people are for, because we spend so much time saying we're against this, but I love that, in your gospel, in your mind of what you hope for and you hope people can aspire to be for themselves and do for other people. Yeah. That's perfectly stated, I think.
It is kind of mind-blowing that the temple recommend questions don't start with, do you love God and yourself and your neighbor? Do you clothe the naked? Do you feed the hungry? Do you serve the poor? Are you not bigoted? Do you love all races, all genders? Do you love the LGBT people? Do you fight for the oppressed? Why isn't there a list of 10 questions around that before it's ever, do you drink beer and do you wear the right underwear?
Right. I couldn't agree more.
And do you give the church 10% of your income when the church is worth hundreds of billions of dollars? It seems totally, I hate to say it, almost anti-Christ, the emphasis that the temple recommend questions kind of are. They're about, do you sign up to the authority? Do you?
They're lower down on the list. I'll give the Mormon Church some credit. I'm reading them right now. They're lower on the list. The number one is, do you have faith in and a testimony of God, the eternal Father, his Son, Jesus Christ, and in the Holy Ghost? And again, going back to that DIY God idea, if you believe in Jesus Christ as somebody who wants you to serve, it's asking you, do you believe in the best attributes of Christ? And so just depends on if somebody is whatever they've made up in their mind of what God cares about. I think that's how I say it.
I mean, the church has every right to have whatever rules for its club it wants to. My two problems with God and Jesus is, first of all, it's the Mormon God and Mormon Jesus, which I think are fraught. But secondly, it's more belief-based. And I really like what Margie said, and you may disagree with this a little bit, Randy, but Margie said beliefs are overrated. And I kind of think that's true. I think how you act is way more important than what you believe.
I actually agree with Margie. In fact, I should mention when we're going through the podcasters, when I need a dose of kind of self-care, which I kind of neglect, I listen to Margie because she's got that dialed in, and she's very articulate and very insightful into, we want to love others, we want to love God, but we want to take care of ourselves. Margie seems to really have that mastered. So,
Shout out to Margie.
Yeah.
Love you, Margie.
Love you, Margie.
Hey, Margie, I love you too.
I agree with Margie before she's even opened her mouth sometimes. She's like, whatever you say, you've got it.
Yeah, she's very wise.
She's so sweet. Yeah.
And I don't mean to pile on the church, but I think it's fair to say that the Temple Recommend questions might be tuned to have a better emphasis on what Christ was for, not what Mormons are against. I don't know.
Well, I think the questions, if I were asking them, is just like you said, are you caring for children? Are you protecting children? Well, the other thing that Jesus said that I think is right on the money is when a crime's committed and harming a child is a crime, the police, the authorities should be called. That should not be covered up. That should not be handled quietly and in-house. Covering up and concealing a crime from the authorities is a double crime in my mind. I don't care if there's reporting laws in that state or not. So those are the types of questions. Do you take care of the children, report crimes to the police so they can investigate, and render under Caesar that which is Caesar? If you commit a crime against a child, you need to go to prison. There needs to be accountability. That's a teaching from Jesus, in terms of rendering under Caesar. So as I read the New Testament, there's lots of just wonderful wisdom there, and that's just another example of it.
I'm gonna at least get one. Carah asked a few of her questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Here's my biggest concern with Christians.
Sure.
Christians, I love you. Here's my one concern with Christians.
Yeah.
To me, baked into too many Christians I've interacted with is the idea that if you don't believe in God or Jesus, that there's a deficiency. I tend to feel like if there's a God that is worth living with forever, if there's a God that's worth worshiping, if there's a God that is truly good, it will not matter if you believed in God in the afterlife, because God's going to go, yeah, I kind of didn't give you the evidence. And, lots of people believed and lots of people didn't, but I'm certainly not going to hold that against you when I kind of stack the deck against many of you. Mm-hmm. And so God's not going to really care if you believed in God, and God's really not going to care if you believe in Jesus. Now, God might care how you treat other people. Mm-hmm. So like when a Christian is like, hey, are you being kind to people? Then I'm like, hey man, we're vibing. Mm-hmm. But if a Christian's like, oh, you don't believe in God and Jesus? Well, I'm worried about you. Like I'm praying for you that you're not, you're not kind of there yet. That's the moment where I'm like, hey, like I don't want to look at you and go, hey, you're missing secularism. You're missing a true love of science and data. Like I don't even want to be, you guys are laughing. I don't even want to be in that form of judging at all. And I think Jesus even backs me here. What did Jesus say about judging? Jesus said, judge not. I don't like Christians if they look at me as lesser than or deficient, if I don't have a proactive. And again, I've never, ever once in my life identified as atheist or agnostic, right. Although I think everyone's agnostic definitionally, because I don't think anybody knows. Mm. But aside from that,
everyone's an atheist to everyone else's gods.
Yeah, and everybody's agnostic because nobody really knows. Mm. But aside from all that, I just don't want any Christian looking at me like looking down, like, well, you don't quite, I feel sorry for you. I'm going to pray for you. You're missing something. I want them to go, hey, John, I look at your life. It looks like you're trying to help people. As far as whatever I believe in, you're just fine. And there's really no difference between me and a believing Christian. I don't think there is. And so I don't want to ever feel like they're looking at me as deficient in some way. And I hope I can return that courtesy and not look at a Christian and go, oh man, well, someday you'll figure out the true way, which isn't
like
belief,
a condescending nature to it. And it also sounds like you're saying, like, when somebody says that to you, you don't want to have to say back to them, like, well, your God didn't give me the evidence to need to believe in them. Like that aren't you just glad that my life is living evidence that I'm a good person?
Yeah.
That if your God needs me to believe in them, then give me more evidence to ascribe a belief as well. Is that where you're going with that? Or you're just saying you just don't like it condescending?
All of that.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah.
And so what do you think about that, Randy?
I agree with you. I wouldn't want to ever do anything and I hope I never have made you feel that way, because I sure haven't ever intended to. I take my cues from Mrs. Fender, who is a very devout, very wonderful Baptist Christian woman who really kind of got what I thought looked like a really vibrant religion. She married Leo Fender, and Leo wasn't a Christian. And she never, it was not a non-issue to her. It's a non-issue to me because for a lot of reasons. One, Jesus said himself, judge not that you be not judged. Now I say that evangelicals pile on and say, well, look at Leviticus, there should be righteous judgment. You should be judging John Dehlin. It's like, yeah. I just, the whole judgmental thing doesn't vibe with me. I look up to you, John, because your marriage has worked. You've helped millions. I help a couple people here and there, but you've helped millions. I mean, 75% of the Mormon church is no longer Mormon. And you're helping turn on the lights. You're causing, whether they like it or not, kicking or screaming, good change within the church, which I'd love to see. I'd love to see the church get healthier and healthier. You say that all the time. 100% agreement. And if Christians make you ever sound that way, I just apologize on behalf of them, because I think they're struggling too. And
none of my decent Christian friends, whether it's Paul Cardall or Chris Thomas or you, or none of them, they're all lovely. I think I don't even want to feel like in their heart they're wishing that I would be different. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
even completely. And that's my message to Christians is like, what if there's many ways up Mount Fuji? Christianity is one angle or lens at it. Even secularism can be another lens or angle at the same outcome. And what if we don't ever just take the posture, that somebody else hasn't quite got it figured out, but we kind of do. That's all I'm hoping for. And that's my only real criticism.
I get where plenty of Christians do get vibe off that judgmental, I'm here to save you, I'm here to change you. I can just tell you where I took my cues with Mrs. Fender, I'd never got that vibe at all.
And that's not you. You're saying that's not you.
It's certainly not me. No.
In your mind, if Carah decides she wants to be an atheist till she dies, but a stone cold, what do you call it, Carah? Stone cold atheist?
Stone cold atheist?
If she wants to be that way.
Cold hardened atheist.
But she's trying to be kind and do good to others, and she dies, as far as the God that you believe in or your theology, how's Carah?
Here's what I honestly think, about atheism. Okay. I think that after a trauma, atheism can be a really healthy place to take a break. I think taking a break and healing, when you're busted up in an auto accident, you go to the hospital, you just take a break. I think that I resonate more with agnostic because, and maybe it's me, and maybe you can explain this to me and help me understand, but I think of, hey, there's 5 senses. We can taste, feel, smell, hear, see, whatever, 5 senses. And yet I believe there's a 6th sense, which science calls the 4th dimension. And I have a real curiosity about it. And correct me, because I'm probably wrong, but I think of atheism as kind of slamming the door at exploring that 6th sense Do you see yourself open to looking at that, or are you just not even interested in
Yeah,
going
big
there?
time. I mean, my sister, I talk to her on the phone all the time. She's very new agey and she's into all kinds of things.
Cool.
And our epistemology, you could say,
Yeah.
of how we arrive at what we believe is true is completely different. She thinks that feelings are completely sufficient. And I've already been in a religion where feelings and faith in something were not as sufficient to warrant a strong belief in something. I can have intuitions about things, but something that I would move forward with, where I bring my kids what I believe about myself, others, afterlife, I haven't found the evidence sufficient to warrant a belief in. And so I'm open to whatever evidence presents
Yeah.
itself, you could say.
Okay.
And because I never want to be, like we're talking about with dogma again, I never want to be so hardened that I know what's right or what's wrong, because I already came from that and I knew
Yeah.
how divisive and problematic it was. And so we were talking about at lunch that people are having spiritual experiences all around the world in different religions, different backgrounds for all different types of reasons. And there's so much that we don't know about what it means to be human and why we're here exactly. I am just not, it's the God of the gaps fallacy. I'm not one to say the reasons we don't know is because God. I'm going to fill that in. I'd rather just say the reasons we don't know is because we haven't investigated it enough yet. And I'm fine with that until we get more evidence.
Well, I have two responses. One is you reminded me of this at lunch. You're an agnostic atheist,
Right.
which agnostic to me is a really healthy thing, to have questions, be asking questions and exploring. When somebody are just stone cold atheists, that was John put in his question. He didn't say agnostic atheist. I think of somebody who's kind of shut the door, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are atheists
that's
out there that can explain to me better.
Yeah, that's the Gnostic atheist we were talking about, like
Yeah.
the 7 out of 7
Yeah,
scale
yeah,
that very
yeah.
few people are in. Yeah.
As long as people are exploring, they have my 100% support. Agnostic atheists to anything, but the Gnostics, the know-it-alls, they cause more harm than help in my mind. I think we probably agree on that.
Yeah. And I think it's healthy to take things into perspective, because I believe in evolution. I believe that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old and that everything that we see on Earth right now existed scattered across the universe at one time.
Right.
And that us as human beings, we evolved from other life forms and other primates, that smaller life forms going back, millions and billions of years. And so I feel like there's answers, everything that we have right now religious answers for, and that we've given religious answers for most of our human existence, of why the sky is blue, why it's raining, all of the whys of, people used to think that the sun used to rise and set because there was like a chariot pulling it across the sky. Everything that we used to give religious answers for, I have come to the point where I feel like the more and more we investigate, we will have less and less religious answers and more scientific answers based in evidence that we can build off of more. And so I'm completely happy to say, I don't know. That's the greatest feeling as an ex-Mormon, just to say, I don't know. And so I'm not going to have like super definitive answers, because I know how the human race evolved.
I couldn't agree with you more. Saying no, I don't know is a really honest thing, and be really refreshing. I totally get that. But I gotta say that in studying science, we really haven't got into that, but maybe some other time we could. But there's kind of a notion that science is always displacing religion. Not always true. When Buddhism and meditation's been around for 2,000 years, they're just discovering in the last 12 years at Harvard Medical School with Sarah Lazar's research. So and I could go through other examples where religion teachings have been around for thousands of years that science is now kind of backing up. So I agree with you that science is displacing a lot of, archaic religion concepts, but that concept kind of works, both ways. The Big Bang Theory, you know who Lamentry is, Georges Lamentry? This is fascinating, that Georges Lamentry was a MIT physicist, brilliant guy. He was also a Catholic priest. He came up with the Big Bang Theory, and he got it from Genesis. The point is, there doesn't need to be a battle between religion and science. Science and religion, Einstein said it himself, that the more elevated that science gets and religion gets, the closer they come to closer and closer to each other. So that quote from Einstein and studying Lamentry's life and the Big Bang Theory, and the fact that it came from Genesis, I think religion, even the Catholic religion, which I respect because they apologize over there, bring something to the table. And I think as we collaborate from different points of view, agnostic, deist, theists, all these different points of view, we get to better and better answers.
Yeah, sure. My follow-up, though, to that, my small pushback is that religion, where there's a practice like meditation, something that we can go on, 1,000 years later and then study why it's so beneficial from like a psychological perspective. My only argument to that is that so much of religion is based on a faith of the typical hoping for things that you can't believe. And normally we don't like substitute and like we only speak of faith when we wish to substitute it for evidence. And so it's usually never the other way around, where we are going to start getting more and more religious answers and substitute those for scientific ones. Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
The necessity of faith is being carved out less and less. I didn't say that very well. People who base their life on faith. Okay, starting over. What do you think what do you think of faith? What role of faith does faith play, do you think, as a human species? What is the benefits of faith? Wider than just what it means to you, what do you think is the benefit of faith? Because what I was trying to say very clumsily just now is that we only speak of faith when we don't have evidence for it. Again, that God of the gaps fallacy, that we don't have the necessity of faith quite as much as we used to anymore, because we have the scientific method and we have reasons for explaining things. So what do you think is the goodness of faith?
Yeah, the goodness of faith. And God of the gaps is another interesting one. When I go into court, the judge does not instruct the jury that to go ahead and speculate what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or how this is going to resolve. The cases in the court system are based upon the evidence in place as of right now. So the idea that science is going to always solve things, there's a book called The End of Science by John Horgan. He writes for Scientific American. Science has hit a number of roadblocks. And on top of that, on the legal perspective, the judge doesn't allow you to speculate in terms of what's going to happen in the future. We got to go on the evidence today. And as Anthony Montabosco said himself just a few weeks ago, that there either is a God or there's not a God. And one set of things that we haven't gotten into is, going from A of atheist to B to belief to C to Christianity. I think it's much more productive to have A to B debates and discussions than A to C, because Christianity, granted, has issues, but the A to B arguments are like abiogenesis and ex nihilo. There's fascinating arguments over whether what the theology looks like is or is there not a God. So the benefits of faith is a long way of getting to answering your question. I think the benefits of faith is, first of all, for me, it's just really fun to explore. I love the door open. I get the sense from both of you that if I came up with some really cool book or some article, you would read it and not give it an ignorant dismissal. That's faith that, hey, maybe there's something out there. And I think that's kind of the journey we're on, is to continuously evolve and continuously grow. And that's the benefit of faith, is that we really shut down the chance of progress, whatever that looks like, if we shut down faith. That's the best shot I have at answering that.
I actually really like that answer. Yeah. I see what you mean. I mean, I'm going to, in my mind, what you just said is almost like a hypothesis, that it's things going back to the normal Mormon hope for. Faith is things that we hope for. What is that? Come on, people, quote it with me. Let's all sing it together. It's like the
evidence of things hoped for, but not seen, or something.
Yeah. That's kind of something that all of the human race that we're striving for, we're hoping for, that there's going to be an answer out there. But you can talk on faith as much as you want. I think that you are my favorite Christian and quite grounded in your reasons. I want a little medal or something. Carah's favorite Christian.
No, I appreciate you saying that. It's a messy topic. It's something that a lot of people can't handle without getting into debates and bashing and all that. But I love sitting down with intelligent people, intellectual atheists and others who play nice and can have these conversations, because that's where we're going to find better and better answers that have real benefits for ourselves and for others around us. That's kind of how I view it. So I think faith, And you know, I've written a couple articles on the scientific method. A hypothesis is an expression of faith.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
Faith gets a bad rap in terms of just a word, and people say faith is I hear all the time. Faith is irrational. What a load of BS. Faith is in the scientific method, and I've published in peer-reviewed journals on that. So we all have faith. We have faith when we go through an intersection. Give me a break. So faith is a good, healthy thing to have. The more we can take that faith, test it, and see if it's repeatable, if it's falsifiable, if it's testable, we're going to get to better and better answers.
And may I combine that with what you were saying earlier about dogma and being open to change, just as I am an atheist who is open to evidence presenting itself. Mm-hmm. Are you at the place where your faith is... Because, I mean, there's this great Aaron Ra quote where he says, faith offers no way to discover truth about anything, but it's a great way to stay wrong forever and not know it. So I just wanted to push back with that quote, that the idea that if you stick with faith forever and you're not open to new evidence, then like, what does that really benefit you? You can just stay wrong forever and say, well, I'm staying wrong because I have faith, instead of the opposite way, which is, I think, is what we were kind of getting to in this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's talking about dogmatic closed
exactly,
faith.
Yeah.
Randy is standing up
I think we all agree dogma of any brand is toxic, period.
So stay open.
And that goes for Republicans and Democrats and all kinds of things. Dogma is just really not helping us get the answers we need.
But if you're open and you're investigating and you're trying with the amount of, the truth and the knowledge, the faith of a mustard seed, and you're experimenting on it, is that kind of what you're getting at? That faith with experimentation, but still being open to change and influence?
Well, one of the epistemologies, which never came up with Anthony Bonabosco, is action research, learn by doing. That's kind of what Jesus said. Hey, here are my doctrines, try them out, see if they work. That's a legitimate, secular, academic epistemology. The scientific method is only one of several others. So I like using all the tools in the tool shed to get at whatever the truth looks like. And by the way, just as I asked you that question, I didn't mean it like might have come across. If you have something I should look at that challenges Christianity, I want to see it. I don't want to go through life, with pink rose sunglasses. I want to examine it. I'm not for the, when I come on Mormon Stories and I'm, presenting, self-identifying as a Christian, I'm going to get the people saying, "Oh, Sky Daddy, you've gone from the frying pan to the pot," and God magic.
You have my seal of approval. Everyone be nice.
Well, I don't know. I hope so. Because I try to respect others, but I kind of figure that kind of stuff is coming from dogmatic people. But intelligent conversations, anybody that has something a book I haven't read, an article I haven't read, I'll read it. I'm open to it. And maybe it will change my mind. But so far, I feel pretty comfortable. Things are going pretty well the direction I'm going. That's not to say your way and your way aren't as or more valid. That's not even the point of all of this. It's just kind of doing what I can do. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. One question though.
Yeah.
This is when you said Jesus tells you to experiment on the word. These are my doctrines.
Yeah.
That's something I really believed when I was a Mormon and also when I was a Christian.
Okay.
But I wasn't taking into the account that if you don't, you can tell me if you believe in a different system. The way that I see Christianity set up is that, hey, God is telling you to go live in one house or the other house. Just so you know, if you don't choose the one where you worship me and love me and follow my doctrines, you have to go live in the house that's on fire and you're going to be alive, like burning alive for a century. So the choice is kind of removed from you. So while I thought that I had, free will to experiment on these things, it feels like the choice is removed from you, that if you don't actually like the doctrines and you don't love God, then you have a really severe consequence. So do you have anything that you want to say to that idea?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis said that Jesus was either a lunatic, a liar, the Lord, and then Bart Ehrman added legend. And considering the bigness of Jesus and the profound effect he's had on humanity, we got to kind of sort that out. The way it was explained to me by I have a friend, Mike, out of Las Vegas. looked nothing like that. Mike's a devout Christian, but he said, Randy, just look up to the sky and say, God, if you're out there, and Jesus, if you're out there, I'm going to open my heart up to you. And I did that. It took a little humility to just go outside and do that, at least humility on my part. And I can just tell you that has kind of evolved. It wasn't a heavy duty, heavy handed, do this in this house, go to heaven, here, go to hell. It wasn't any discussion like that. And I think there are smarter, more compassionate Christians out there. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but I've been with people that I have regard for who explain it in a much more sensible way in terms of just expressing a particle of faith without this dogmatic, these, one thing and I'm sorry to go on a rant, but I got to do it. I'm against anti-Mormons, people that are riding around scooters in temple clothing. I'm against people that go to general conference and shout at people and families going to general conference. That is just garbage behavior. I don't care where anybody is on the belief system, but hounding people, yelling at people, screaming at people, making light of people's. I didn't go to Hindu and make fun of the monkey god. So I think we all. I don't know if we all agree, but I think we all agree. That kind of extremism, Gnosticism, is really toxic and an embarrassment. But the Christianity that I've kind of connected with was far more Mrs. Fender. Mrs. Fender never said a word to me once to coerce me or move me or invite me or shift me towards Christianity. It was her example that was so powerful. And my friend, the most he said is just give it a shot. It was very, very small and simple.
And I'm trying to remember your answer from before about like many ways to get to God. I can't remember. Can you repeat your answer of what you believe kind of about where everyone will eventually end up? Because it sounds like you're not falling in line with any of that typical like burning in hell or any that. What do you describe the afterlife? What do you think it's going to be?
That's such a great question, Carah, because I got to find a really smart theologian, because I've heard, and I don't profess to know this as a sideline expert, but I've heard that the whole hell's fire and brimstone thing was kind of manufactured by the Catholic Church in the 3rd century to kind of get people in line. I don't know if there's truth to that. I'd love to talk to Bart Ehrman, and boy, I wish I had an hour with him. But that'd be one question I'd have for him of where that kind of came along, because my sense of just reading the red letters of Jesus is that Jesus was just a mellow, kind person who had his trilogy of those who were pedophiles, scribes and Pharisees, and monetized the temple. Other than that, it was all about finding marginalized people and helping them out, and a belief in his divinity, which I have. I want to be clear about that. But that's the message. And it's been so messed up. It's just really unfortunate. I don't like it myself.
You're not a big hell guy, basically.
I'm not a big hell guy. I think here's the real reason. Jesus said himself, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you're my neighbors. Why would Jesus send you to hell when he just told me to love you? He's not going to do something it tells me and do something different himself. He's going to love everybody. And I think he's going to give everybody a chance. Now, in my work with disasters, there's some people that just hang on to hatred and crime and violence, and they're just addicted to it and addicted to anger. And Jesus, nobody can really help them. Even the inmates in prison have given up on him. But for those who have a heart and want to do the right thing, I think Jesus is more than willing to accept all those, period. That's what I think.
Yeah. I think that's the best version of Jesus I've ever heard. Like a Jesus without the harsh penalties and consequences, the fire and brimstone, a Jesus that...
I think of it as universalism. That's kind of a universalistic Christian.
Yeah, I'm not a universalist, but I get what you're saying. I think there are people that will choose hate over love. But people that choose love over hate, I think are going in the right direction. And we just keep going,
Mm-hmm. The way I don't want. Did you have a quick thing you wanted to add, Carrie?
I have like an hour left of questions. So
we're having it back tomorrow.
I know, just cut me off. I can
ask Alan Mount all the hard questions. He's smarter than me.
Okay, so yeah. Randy's coming back for a part 3 tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We're gonna have Alan Mount on. We're gonna talk about theism versus atheism. Is there a quick thing that's kind of really contextually important, Carah, that you want to add before I ask a final thing or make a final point?
Yeah. Can Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he himself could not eat it?
I mean, it's either yes or no, Randy. It's either yes or no.
That is a great question, and there's
Find more great questions at burritochurch.com.
I'm gonna quote the Buddha where he said, "I don't know."
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that, Carah. That was important. I appreciate it.
That's awesome.
Okay. So for me, really quickly, 2 things for me before we wrap up tonight.
Yeah.
Epistemology. In Mormonism, epistemology comes down to feelings. It's basically, it's true because I had this feeling.
Right.
I prayed about it and I got the witness, and my beliefs are true because I felt something.
Right.
And anyone who's got 3 brain cells that they are applying to that position will realize that mutually exclusive or conflicting theologies, and even downright hateful, violent theologies, can all be rooted in the same justification. Ergo, beliefs are not a sound epistemological foundation.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on ultimately the epistemology of your faith relying in feelings, or do you characterize the foundations of your faith as being something other than feelings?
I would say feelings are about 25% of my overall decisions. I really did genuinely go with egos, logos, pathos, and duos. Pathos is feelings. That was my attempt. I think that where Anthony Montabosco gets a lot of traction is that he talks to people that have only gone on feelings, and frankly, that can be a very silly thing. My journey has been, and we haven't gotten into this, and hopefully someday we can, but I found that the people that I really resonate with are the Harvard physics professors, the Berkeley law professors, the Yale medical doctors, people that have a scientific method background that have landed in a similar place, because I find their arguments more compelling. And my journey has been far more kind of evidence-based. I hate to say it, but I'm happy to go through the evidence sometime, but far more evidence-based than I thought. But I think feelings are correct. I was with I was with a rock star. I'm not going to mention his name because it's his story, but I was with a rock star, a name you'd all know. And he said, "Randy, do you know what sympathetic resonance is?" And I go, "No, I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you guys already know, or if..."
Just tell us.
Okay. Well, he said, when you're in a studio and you ring a bell and the other instruments in the room start vibrating in the same vibration, that's sympathetic resonance. He says people are the same too. And the vibration is so important. And so emotions are important. It's got to ring true. But it also needs to be logical. It also needs to be ethical. And I need to look at both sides of the story. It completes the picture.
Beautiful. Okay. Last position. I have a piece of ice in my mouth because I'm dehydrated. So forgive me, listeners. I mean no disrespect.
Okay.
And viewers.
Can you telepathically send me the question and I can just say it? Oh,
no, I
great.
just spit out my ice off camera. Okay. So last thing.
Yeah.
What it really comes down to for me are 2 things. Like, or let's just say, here's my best attempt to really simplify and find common ground. Theists / Christians believe there's a God. Secular people acknowledge that there's something, some power, some force, nature in the universe that must be behind what's going on. Something, right? Mm-hmm. there's really no difference between those two positions. One calls it God or Heavenly Father or Allah, and the other call it science or nature or power, whatever. No real difference. That's number one. So why do we really make a big deal out of this when we both believe in some power or force? I'm trying to find common ground here. And this is kind of giving away what my conclusions will be tomorrow when you and Alan talk.
Sure.
But the second thing is Jesus ultimately was about being kind to yourself and other people.
Right.
I'm all for being kind
Sure.
to yourself and other people. So like if we both acknowledge a power, maybe we call it by different names, and we're both focused on being kind to each other, like, does any other difference really matter?
I'm going to read a quote from Albert Einstein, and this is the best. Einstein said it better than I can, because I think, let me find it. Here it is. Albert Einstein says, science can only be created by those who are thoroughly imbued in the aspiration towards truth and understanding. I think that goes to your question. We're both on this quest to get more truth and more understanding. And then Einstein says, the source of feeling, however, springs from the sphere of religion. The situation may be expressed as an image. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. And I think, to kind of round out that answer, I think that as I study science and these things that could be nothing short of supernatural with what science calls translogical, I think we're all on the same path. And I think as science evolves, and science is evolving, and religion, smart religion is evolving. And I think that the translogical is indistinguishable from the supernatural. And we're in this quest to answer the big questions. We're all sitting here with this remarkable complexity and the fine-tuning of the universe. Something crazy interesting happened here. And there seems to be the fingerprints of a designer here. Forget theology. Just, is there God or is there not a God in terms of a creator? And if you don't like the word God, an intelligent creative force. Those are kind of the big questions. And as long as we all have open minds and we're trying to get at that, whether with science or religion, I happen to think science and religion. I don't think it has to be a science versus religion nonsense. I think science and religion, as they evolve, get closer and closer together. I call it, some people call it the spiritual dimension. Science calls it, quantum mechanics calls it the fourth dimension, which is equally as magical, but as we just engage and have open minds and on a quest to have these kind of conversations, because clearly I don't have all the answers. None of us do. Let's be honest. We're going to just get glimpses of what that looks like. We're not going to get answers, but we're going to get glimpses of if there's life after death, spirituality, is there a designer, is there a creator? We're going to get glimpses into those things. That's all that we can hope for in this world. And I'm not going to ever put down anybody who doesn't get the same glimpses I do or doesn't get the glimpses I do. This is silly. We're all on this quest.
And I love that, and it's very unifying. The only thing I'll add that's important to me, and I'll ask Carah to add this to the show notes, there's a book called The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, where he talks about bad beliefs, superstitious beliefs,
Sure.
whether it's that in the 16th or 17th century that certain girls were witches and that they practiced witchcraft, and so let's kill them, or people believing that aliens come down and abduct you and impregnate you,
right?
Or let's just say QAnon. I'll go there a little bit. That's some political conspiracy that Oprah and Tom Hanks eat babies and drink their blood so they can keep looking young. Whatever it is, that there are harmful beliefs. Agreed?
Oh, amen, Brother John. Yeah, for sure.
And trusting in like essential oils to do way more than they're capable of doing, like curing cancer or straightening your teeth through chakras or foot zoning. Like I want to say that not all beliefs are okay, that there are beliefs that are harmful or distracting or a waste of time or not worthy. Can we agree on that as well?
1,000%.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been bad behaviors blamed on God. There's always been, snake oil sold as science. there's been both good and enlightened science. There's also, I wrote an article on junk science. Not all science is good science. You know, when people put signs in their front yard that says science is real, I'm curious what science they're talking about, because there's, you know, when I was a kid, there were magazine ads that said, your doctor recommends you smoke Camels. I mean, that's bad science. So, and there's bad religions. My point is there are bad religions. There's also good, healthy religions. What Mrs. Fender exemplified, and there are other people, the Hindu guy I met, we're still friends over in India. It seemed like a really good, healthy religion. And I respect the heck out of him. So we gotta get off this notion that all religion's bad, all science is good. All, you know, it's a mix, and we gotta have the critical thinking skills to navigate through all the BS and all the manipulations by very smart people who get us addicted to various foods and all the stuff, and have critical thinking skills that get us closer and closer to intelligent, you know, decisions. That's all we can do.
Love it. All right, Carah, what do you think? Did we do it? Did we square the circle? Did we solve the classic conundrum and reach kumbaya status today with Randy?
I am an atheist and I am satisfied with this conversation. And I think, Randy, you are an intelligent and critical thinking person, and you're also a Christian. And I don't think that's like, they're not mutually exclusive. That's not a contradiction at all. I think that you're very studious and looking at evidence and trying to come to the smartest, most empathetic reason to believe the things you believe. And I respect you for that.
Well, thanks. And I really respect you where you're at. I mean, I've listened to the podcasts, you know, speaking of religion, religiously. And,
Since Carah joined.
No, really. And, you know, you bring youth to the table. You bring a new generation. You bring a female voice, which is essential. And I just really admire. In fact, if you don't mind, I got something for both of you. Is that okay?
Wait, you're going to give this on screen, or can we end and then you give it to us?
This is on screen.
You want to do this on screen? This is kind of dramatic. Are you afraid, Carah?
I think I know what it is.
What's he going to pull out of his satchel?
It's a piece of
sunny
paper.
yellow is John.
Oh, I'm getting a gift on Mormon Stories Pod. I can't reach it.
And why don't you open yours, Carah? This is. There's small tokens.
Carah's pink. Carah's is pink. Carah's opening hers.
We were just asking about your
Just
books,
rip it
actually.
open. Just rip it open.
This sounds really good in the headphones. This is ASMR. Oh, it's your book, Leo Fender.
And it's signed by Mrs. Fender. It's one of the few remaining. So
Oh my gosh, thank you.
I hope you enjoy
Oh,
that.
because she passed away, right?
Yeah, she did.
So,
Very sadly.
there they are.
Very sadly.
okay, and mine is a cereal bowl.
Well, it's a cereal bowl, but this comes, John.
That's so beautiful. This is beautiful.
Well, it's called RFM speaks Japanese. I don't. Kintsugi.
Okay.
But it's a broken bowl, and that bowl, a beautiful ceramic bowl, instead of being thrown away.
Oh, so the golden lining is actually where it's been sealed.
It's been put back together with gold, and that's the business you're in. You help people rebuild with gold, and the fractures are considered part of the story, part of the beauty. So, just a small token. So,
Carah's getting misty-eyed over there. Why are you misty-eyed, Carah?
Because I just forgot that I was on mute. Anyway, I said, oh, sweet. Thank you so much, Randy.
You're very welcome. Thank you, guys. That's just a small token to say thanks.
Well, Dr. Randy Bell, it's been so lovely to spend 6 on-screen hours with you. And we've got a couple hours to go tomorrow with Alan Mount.
Yeah.
Sort of atheist meets theist. And we love Alan Mount and his TikTok. And we're excited for tomorrow. And tomorrow we can maybe get into some of the things that we didn't get into today. Carah, you can bring out any other things you didn't get to ask. But we're excited to have you for round 3, but we're also super grateful for rounds 1 and 2 today. I know that it's always emotionally complex to come out publicly on such a big, let's just face it, Mormon Stories is a big stage.
Yeah.
We now have at any given episode probably over 100,000 listeners or viewers and viewers. And so it's never easy, especially when you have believing children or, you know, fellow friends or family that you respect. So thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for your willingness to tell your story and speak up. And I know there's going to be a lot of Christians that are like, yeah, representation.
They're going to hate my guts.
Randy
'cause
makes us look good.
I'm pro-LGBT. I think a lot of Christians are going to be down on me, and a lot of people coming out of Mormonism are going to be down on me because I have a faith, and I think the Mormon Church is certainly going to be down on me. So I don't know.
But Randy, let's be clear. F all those people. F them all. Every single one
the
of them.
whole audience.
I needed, seriously, when I was leaving Mormonism, I would have loved to find this on the YouTube algorithm of somebody giving a good blueprint of what it looks like to leave Mormonism in a non-dogmatic type of way, pro-LGBTQ, all of the things. I think is going to be really inspirational for a lot of people.
Science-respecting,
who need like a bridge and kind of need a good roadmap of how things have worked out for you so far and the books that you've read and the places that you've gotten to. Like coming up against my and John's, hard questions and stuff that I think you answered wonderfully. I think this episode will do a lot of good.
Thanks. I think that cynicism is one thing. I haven't detected that, but critical thinking is just being objective, and objective thinking. And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I think I'm right. We all think we're right, but I'm open. I really sincerely am open. But I've seen what I've seen. I've had the experiences that I've seen, and I'm glad that I brought the gaychurch.org to the table where people who feel like they need a place to go have a place to go. And the other thing, the last parting word I want to say, as long as I got the mic, is this Boy Scout thing. The thing that got me off the dime to call you up, John, and say, let's do this thing, was the Boy Scout thing.
Here's a TikTok here.
Yeah. This is irrefutable evidence. It was in Deseret News. The church, the Mormon church, wanted to pay out only $250 million in child abuse claims just involving the Boy Scouts. That's not involving male-to-male abuse outside of Boy Scouts, and it's not involving any female abuse. $250 million is a big payoff. That was rejected. The number's going to go up. One of my clients was the guy that went after the Catholic Church for $1 billion. I know a little bit about this topic because he and I have had some conversations. That is a lot of systemic abuse. I don't say that other than to say that is a ugly, unfortunate fact. It's mathematics. It cannot be disputed. So for those staying in the Mormon Church, you have my love. You have my support. Please do not ever let your children go anywhere without two adults or being with your children. It's just a safe, sane thing to do until they put the protocols in place that absolutely shuts all that down, and they start calling the authorities on every crime allegedly convicted. I feel so passionately about that. That's what got me off the dime to come and do this. Thanks for letting me share that.
Kara's nodding.
Yeah, we did a little Mormon Stories episode. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes about that church payout and that big. That was just a couple months ago. Yeah, with the Boy Scouts of America. Yeah.
That's a lot of abuse.
That is a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
Not bad apples. It's a systemic thing. Sorry,
systemic
guys.
problem, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Randy Bell, we love you. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Cara Burrell, it's so lovely to have you as co-host.
It's been so lovely to be your co-host today, and we have a new employee here, so we have another fun figure around the Mormon Stories office. So.
I haven't asked her permission yet.
So that's why I didn't say it. Yeah. So I just said, life is good. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy that Randy got to spend the whole day together getting to know you.
Yeah,
it's been really, really fun.
Yeah, really. Sincerely, Cara. I appreciate it. And John, thanks. I love you too, man. And keep up the great work, both of you.
Thanks, man.
And anonymous figure in the background.
And
the three of us.
And she who shall not be named in the background.
Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And that just goes to show you we are growing here at the Open Stories Foundation. We're grateful for Gerardo, Cara, Jennifer, Brooklyn, our board, Clint and Carrie, and employee X. And but mostly we're grateful also for our donors because we could not do any of this, of which Randy is one. We could not do any of this without the generous donations of you, our listeners and viewers. I mentioned before that less than 1 out of 1,000 of our listeners or viewers are donors. And again, no shame if you can't afford. We give this away for free because we want all to receive it and all to enjoy it. So no shame if you can't support us. But we lose sometimes 20 donors a month. And if we don't replace them, then we have to let Cara go, or I have to step down, or we have to shut things down. And so as long as you value this content, if you can provide us with your support, if you could step up to fill the shoes of the other donors who have stopped donating, we would really appreciate that. All you got to do is go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor, $10 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. We really appreciate that. You can also donate through Venmo at Mormon Stories. You can super chat us on YouTube. There's a donate button for our nonprofit on YouTube now that I think YouTube doesn't take a huge cut from. And again, the super chat features the little $sign in the YouTube chat. You can also click on the stars feature in Facebook. That also somehow gets us some type of support financially. And we're working on merch. I've talked to our new employee about helping us get merch going. But, we just need your support. So please support us if you can. Thanks to everyone who does. Please email us at mormonstories@gmail.com if you have any feedback or ideas or questions or concerns. Whenever you comment on YouTube or Facebook or on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, that helps with the algorithms, that helps with the shares and the likes and the follows. So do all that stuff. Share us, like us, follow us. TikTok, our Mormon Stories podcast TikTok channel now has over 110,000 subscribers. Thanks to you, Carah Burrell. That's a huge contribution you've made.
Thanks.
And Instagram's growing as well. So we're just growing on all the major platforms. We're about to hit 50,000 YouTube subscribers. Within a month, we will hit 50,000 YouTube subscribers. That's a huge deal. And again, we're over 15 million downloads and views now. We're probably going to hit 20 to 30 downloads and views within the 2022 time period because things are just going bananas. So just know that we're making a difference. And mind-bogglingly, we mentioned this, I think, last episode, we have more never Mormon viewers and listeners now than we have believing Mormons and inactive Mormons and ex-Mormons. So like now Mormon Stories is reaching more never Mormons than anyone else, which is mind-blowing. So now we have to explain every single acronym to our never Mormon viewers and listeners so that they get what we're talking about. So Carah, I had a recent request to do an episode on weird Mormon terminology for never Mormons so that they can know what a steakhouse is and they can know what a patriarchal blessing is and they can know
Chuckarama. It's when
Outback, Steakhouse.
Easy.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. Never
Wrong
mind.
answers only.
Okay.
That'd be a great episode.
We don't need that episode. Scratch that. Anyway, what a TBM is, what a PMO means. Like
TBM is after you drink your coffee and you have like never mind.
oh gosh.
Oh, that's a BM. Never mind. Okay.
Carah's got to bring it low. Thank you, Carah.
Can anyone congratulate me for how fast I worked out the letters for TBM and I was a truly
You're
quick
a
bowel
genius.
movement.
You're an absolute genius.
Yeah. I'm thinking on my feet for all the poop jokes. So.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Carah. All
My
right.
name's Carah.
We love you guys. Thanks for the support. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. And thanks for your support. We'll see you guys all again very soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.
Bye.